Robb Stark stood upon a hillside at dawn, the dew-laden grasses of the riverlands glistening beneath the early sun. Wind ruffled his cloak of gray fur, stirring the shaggy mantle that marked him as the king in the north. Summer was waning, though not yet gone, and the crisp hint of autumn in the air reminded him that time moved quickly, too quickly for all the tasks that awaited him. He breathed in that cooling air, a slight ache in his chest as he recalled the circumstances that had led him here. Ned Stark's imprisonment and execution in King's Landing, the family splintered by war, and the great wave of rebellion that had spread across Westeros in the wake of King Robert's death. Yet a new possibility lay before him this morning, something he had not dared hope for months before, an alliance, a chance to truly unite the realm against the greatest threats, both old and new. News had come that King Renly Baratheon, younger brother of the late king, had gathered a massive host in the Stormlands and the Reach, a host that included the power of House Tyrell. If the gossiping ravens spoke truly, Renly claimed the Iron Throne by his own right, disputing the legitimacy of Joffrey Baratheon and vowing to bring good governance and stability to a realm in tumult. Robb had heard all these tidings through his mother, Catelyn Stark, who had traveled south to treat with Renly once it was clear that King's Landing was no place for Starks. While she was a veteran of courtly negotiations, something about the nature of this parley had given Robb both trepidation and hope. Renly Baratheon, for all his ambition, was known to be charismatic. His men loved him, and the songs about him were effusive. They praised his good humor, his generosity, his gallantry. In a war-torn land where the Lannisters had grown increasingly cruel and Joffrey reigned with a capricious fist, many lords, particularly those in the south, found themselves drawn to a king who seemed ready to rule with a gentle hand. What no one knew was how Renly would treat with the king in the north. The old lines of loyalty that had once bound the Seven Kingdoms to House Targaryen and then House Baratheon had begun to split apart like old seams. The North, battered and furious at Ned Stark's murder, had declared itself free of the Iron Throne. The Riverlands supported Robb as well, seeing in him the one who had come to deliver them from the Lannister invasions. But was there a place for an alliance that respected the North's sovereignty while still uniting with Renly's claim? These were questions that had made Robb lose more than one night's sleep. He had dreamed of his father's voice, that calm and measured tone which so often guided him. He had dreamed of the old castle in Winterfell, the comforting presence of the Godwood and the hot springs. Yet the southern roads were open before him, and the tasks set by life were never so simple as drifting back home. He still had to free his sisters, Sansa and Arya, from King's Landing if they were indeed still captive. He still had to avenge his father. Above all, he had to keep his army intact. Though they were a strong force, they were not inexhaustible, and the tides of war were ever-changing. If Renly Baratheon truly offered an alliance, one that allowed the North to remain free or at least recognized its status, then a great door might open for both sides. And so, upon that dew-laden morning, Robb Stark peered down the hillside and saw the stirring of camp beneath him. Formations of men, a sea of tents in the distance, and the bustle of the waking soldiers. The banners of House Stark snapped in the wind, the direwolf dancing a slow dance. Nearby, the Great John was already hollering orders, his booming voice carrying all the way to the crest. Farther off, Roose Bolton's men stirred in eerie silence. Catelyn Stark was to depart that morning. Her retinue was prepared, as were a few lords chosen to accompany her to Renly's encampment, though she planned to first parley with some of Renly's knights on neutral ground. Robb felt a sense of weight in his chest at letting his mother go back into the thick of negotiations, but he knew that she was best equipped for it. His own face was still unlined with age, and though he had won battles, there were men twice his age who might dismiss him as a boy. Catelyn was not so easily dismissed. She had the advantage of wisdom and the cunning gleaned from watching and learning at Ned Stark's side. Robb had decided to remain back, maintaining their position in the Riverlands, protecting territory that they had fought so hard to secure. One false move and the Lannisters would strike again. During the midday hours after Catelyn's departure, Robb rode through the camp to review his men. Some carried old wounds from the battles of the Whispering Wood and Oxcross. Others were fresh reinforcements from the north, men who had marched from White Harbor or the mountain clans. He spoke words of encouragement, gave thanks for their service, and reminded them that the gods, the old gods, in any case, watched over them. He tried to give each man a sense that they were all part of something greater. They were not simply men with swords, they were Northmen seeking justice, or so he believed. But if the promise of peace lay with the southern armies of Renly Baratheon, might that justice come sooner? He wondered as he rode among them whether the men could taste the hope on the wind, the possibility of forging a future that did not require further ruin. Evening fell with the quiet hush of anticipation. Ravens arrived at dusk, bearing word from Catelyn. She had reached the outskirts of Renly's forces. She described in her letter a mighty host indeed, the banners of the rose and the stag fluttering side by side. Highgarden had committed fully to Renly, and its cavalry, archers, and knights numbered in the tens of thousands. In her words, they were magnificently arrayed. The Stormlanders, too, had turned out for their young lord. Combined, this force overshadowed King Joffrey's or Robb's, which was precisely why an alliance might prove so decisive. Catelyn wrote that Renly had received her courteously, listened to the terms she proposed on Robb's behalf, and seemed open-minded. She had not yet met Margaery Tyrell, Renly's new queen, though there was talk that she was a gracious lady. Most importantly, Renly's lords were rumored to be hungry for action, wanting to move upon the Lannisters in King's Landing before Stannis Baratheon, the elder brother of Renly, could gain more ground or before Tywin Lannister's maneuvers could spoil them. Robb slept fitfully that night, imagining how the negotiations might unfold. He feared betrayal, but also yearned for a swift end to the war. But war seldom ended swiftly, that much he knew. Still, if anyone could negotiate a favorable agreement that preserved the North's autonomy and rescued his sisters, it would be his mother. He vowed he would trust her. Days stretched on, and Robb received more communications from Catelyn. Thus began a waiting game, one that gave his men time to rest, though not enough to lose discipline. He needed them ready to move at a moment's notice. Meanwhile, he continued to plan strategy with his closest advisors, men like the Blackfish, Brynden Tully, who had proven an invaluable ally with a keen mind for war, and Lord Bolton, who offered counsel in a voice as cool as ice. Amid these days of relative calm, visitors from Renly's camp arrived with official proposals. Robb met them in a great field, beneath a simple pavilion. On the surface, it looked like a typical war council. Men gathered around a wooden table, an unrolled map of the 7 kingdoms pinned at the corners with stones, an onslaught of insignia-laden cloaks stirring in the breeze. The envoys from Renly were mostly knights of lesser rank, but among them was Ser Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers himself, renowned for his prowess at tournaments. He came glittering in plate polished to a mirror sheen, a cape draped with the Tyrell sigil. He was a sight to behold, and he carried himself with the confidence of a victor. Ser Loras greeted Robb with a hint of courtesy, yet the young knight's pride was evident. He spoke of King Renly's admiration for the valor of the Northmen and extended an invitation for Robb to come south and meet Renly in person. Robb maintained his composure, politely stating that he would consider it, but only once details about the alliance were hammered out to ensure the safety of his men. The North was not eager to bend the knee again, not after Joffrey's treachery. Ser Loras pressed the point that Renly desired the realm's unity, that they might all turn their swords against the true enemy, the Lannisters, as both sides could agree. He presented a sealed parchment bearing the official terms that Renly's advisors had drawn up. Robb studied it, letting the lords at his side examine it as well. There were many clauses, some standard, others quite bold. It recognized the rightful sovereignty of the North but suggested that the North's loyalty to Renly's cause would be repaid by a permanent alliance that included trade privileges, mutual defense pacts, and the immediate promise to rescue Sansa and Arya Stark from King's Landing. Though it was all very formal, Robb could not help but sense a flicker of genuine good faith behind it. Renly's approach was different from the Lannisters or the Crowns. There was no threat hidden behind honeyed words. Instead, there was a frank acknowledgement that the kingdom was in crisis and the bloodshed needed to cease. Ser Loras watched Robb carefully as he read, but offered no commentary beyond what had been written. A hush fell over the pavilion. Outside, horses stamped their hooves and the wind whispered through the tall grass. Ultimately, Robb told Ser Loras that he would need time to deliberate with his advisors and speak again with his mother. He would dispatch a raven to her that very evening. Ser Loras agreed readily, leaving the parchment behind. Then he and his retinue departed with formal bows, though there was an undercurrent of tension that lingered in their wake. Robb was left wondering whether these were the terms Renly truly wanted or if it was merely a starting point for negotiation. In the privacy of his war tent, Robb conferred with his bannermen. Great John Umber pounded a fist on the table in delight, stating that if all went as well as that parchment promised, they'd soon march on King's Landing in one unstoppable wave, rescue the Stark girls, and see the Lannisters' heads on spikes. However, Roose Bolton cautioned that such an alliance would effectively tie them to the south once more, no matter what the words on the parchment said about sovereignty. The Blackfish nodded, urging a careful reading of every line. War was about more than swords, it was about the lines of fealty, trade, land, and marriage that would shape the realm for generations. If they rushed in blindly, they might find themselves subservient to a southern king the same way they had once knelt to Targaryens and Baratheons. That night, Robb mulled over everything, the flickering lamplight dancing upon the parchment's bold statements. A sense of unease warred with a spark of hope. He remembered his father's devotion to duty, his mother's wise counsel, and he prayed to the old gods to give him clarity. News arrived within the next days that Renly had begun a slow march northward, presumably to position himself advantageously if any confrontation arose with Stannis or the Lannisters. With each passing league, Renly's host grew, as lesser lords, some from the Crownlands, some from the Reach, declared for him. The realm was fracturing, but for once, a partial sense of unity, albeit different from the old monarchy, might be found if Renly and Robb could truly cement a pact. Messages flew between the camps. Catelyn wrote daily of Renly's willingness to accommodate the North's demands if it meant defeating the Lannisters quickly. She described banquets in Renly's pavilion, how he tried to maintain some semblance of chivalric order despite the chaos of war. She noted that he was kind to his young bride, Marjorie, and that his men adored him for his easy laughter and liberal generosity. A second meeting was arranged, but this time face-to-face between Robb and King Renly himself. A location on the border of the Stormlands and the Reach was selected, fields that had gone fallow due to the ravages of conflict, but now served as neutral ground. Robb prepared for the journey, taking with him a small but formidable retinue of 200 mounted men. Catelyn would meet him there, and she would, in turn, bring him directly into Renly's presence. The days leading up to his departure were fraught with planning. He left behind part of his host under the command of Roose Bolton and the remainder under the Blackfish. This was a risk, venturing so far with so few, but if the alliance were real, it had to be done in good faith. They set out at dawn, the mist curling around them. Grey Wind, Robb's direwolf, loped at his side, a silent and protective presence. The men rode in disciplined lines, the Stark banner flapping at the vanguard. Not for the first time, Robb felt a surge of pride that such men followed him willingly. He had not asked for any of this, not to become king in the north, nor to fight a war that spanned half the continent. Yet here he was, determined to forge a better path forward. As they neared the meeting site, Robb caught his first glimpse of Renly Baratheon. He was astride a fine charger, wearing armor that was more ornate than practical, polished to a golden sheen, with the crowned stag emblazoned upon the breastplate. Around him stood knights in garb equally splendid, the gold rose of House Tyrell, the fox sandflowers of some minor Reach lords, the blue-on-gold sigils of Stormlander houses. It was a colorful array, a testament to the southern tradition of pageantry. Robb felt a moment of mild discomfort in his simpler, though well-forged, northern plate and cloak of rough fur. But he held his head high. Renly was younger than Robb had envisioned. After all, the man had been scarcely more than a boy when King Robert still lived. Yet he had a confident bearing, and when he dismounted to greet Robb, his manner was gracious. A broad smile spread across his face as he welcomed the king in the north. Soldiers on both sides looked on, their arms at the ready in case of a trap, but there was no immediate sign of deceit. Renly gestured for Robb to walk with him towards a large, open-sided tent where they would speak in private. Catelyn awaited them there, and when Robb saw her, he felt a wave of relief to find her unharmed and seemingly in good spirits. The conversation began with polite pleasantries. Renly inquired about the health of the North, lamenting the woes that had befallen Winterfell, the terrible news of Ned Stark's fate, and the travails of Sansa and Arya. He said he wished to set them free if it was at all within his power. In turn, Robb asked after Renly's progress against the Lannisters, or if indeed he planned to move against them. Renly's smile faded slightly, replaced by a determined set to his jaw. He declared that the Lannisters would face justice for their sins against the realm, the murder of Ned Stark chief among them. He seemed to speak with genuine conviction, and Robb could not help but be moved. Over cups of watered wine, they pored over the details of the alliance. Robb explained that the North would not accept any yoke of subjugation. Their new monarchy was precious to them, a statement of independence after Ned's murder. Renly, to Robb's slight surprise, did not balk at the idea of a recognized northern kingdom, so long as the North allied militarily with him against Joffrey and later Stannis, should Stannis refuse to join the cause. They spoke of the conditions for trade routes, safe passage, the potential for reciprocal exchange of hostages to ensure peace, and, of course, the immediate priority of rescuing the Stark girls. Renly assured them that once the Allied forces pressed upon King's Landing, they would issue terms to the Lannisters and demand the release of the girls. If Joffrey refused, siege or open warfare would commence. Renly did not relish the idea of harming the small folk of the city, but he was convinced that the Lannisters would prefer to surrender rather than let King's Landing be put to the torch, especially if faced with a combined host of the North, the Stormlands, and the Reach. Robb listened carefully, occasionally glancing at his mother. She inclined her head in subtle encouragement, as if to say that, yes, this was their best chance. Still, some part of Robb remained uncertain. War was unpredictable, and he had seen too many times how men's grand intentions got swallowed by the brutality of conflict. He wanted to see if Renly was the kind of man who would hold to his word when tested. But these are answers time alone reveals, he thought. For now, the alliance needed to be forged, or the North would stand alone against too many enemies. In a gesture meant to symbolize good faith, Renly offered to host a feast that very evening. Catelyn urged Robb to accept, and so he did, bringing with him a few of his trusted bannermen. It felt strange, almost surreal, to walk amid Renly's bustling camp. Soldiers from Highgarden sang light-hearted tunes. The Stormlander men boasted of their prowess in justs. There was laughter and the smell of roasting meats, pepper and saffron and other southern spices the Northmen weren't used to. Amid the swirl of activity, the opulence put Robb in mind of tournaments rather than war. It was a stark contrast to his own, more subdued camp where grim vigilance reigned. At the feast, Renly presented his queen, Margaery Tyrell. She was poised and graceful, and she spoke respectfully to Robb, acknowledging his kingship in the North. She asked after the well-being of his mother, too, showing the courtesy of a proper hostess. Robb was not much for courtly manners, but he tried his best to reciprocate. Beneath the colored lanterns, minstrels played lively tunes, and the throng of knights, ladies, and attendants created a near-constant hum of celebration. For a time, Robb allowed himself to relax, sampling the succulent dishes laid out: spiced wine, roast duck in honey, fresh bread with thyme and rosemary. Gray winds slunk around the edges, unsettled by the crowd, but still staying close. Occasionally, the direwolf's presence drew startled gasps. Some men in Renly's retinue seemed unnerved by the beast, but others were fascinated. Renly himself gazed upon Grey Wind with respectful curiosity, remarking that such a creature truly did evoke the spirit of the North. Meanwhile, conversations turned to talk of the battles that might soon come. Lord Randall Tarly, a formidable general in Renly's service, took a keen interest in the North's fighting style, their reliance on foot soldiers and archers who were used to harsh winters. He spoke of how, combined with the Tyrell cavalry, they could form an unstoppable force. Robb only nodded, aware of the weight of these plans. So much had to go right for them to succeed. He did not let the wine cloud his head, though. He kept his mind sharp, answering politely but guarding his deeper thoughts. When the evening ended, Renly walked with Robb to the edge of the camp. Beneath torchlight, their silhouettes danced on the trampled grass. Renly set a hand on Robb's shoulder, a strangely intimate gesture for two kings who had only just met. He expressed his desire to see the realm at peace once more, that no more blood need be spilled. He said that if uniting with the Northmen and allowing a measure of independence, then so be it. He wanted a lasting alliance, one that might one day see trade and mutual prosperity flow between them. Robb wondered if Renly truly meant that, or if it was the wine talking. But seeing the earnest look in Renly's eyes, he dared to hope. A series of councils followed in the days to come. Robb's advisors spoke with Renly's advisors at length. They hammered out final details of the alliance, lines on maps, distribution of supplies, troop movements. The letters traveled back and forth, with Catelyn often playing mediator. Gradually, a formal agreement took shape. The North would remain independent, recognized as its own kingdom, with Robb as king in the North. However, for the duration of the conflict with the Lannisters and the uncertain situation with Stannis, the North would fight alongside Renly's forces. They would coordinate strategies, share resources, and push together for a final confrontation. In return, Renly pledged to restore the Stark sisters to Robb's care and to cease any claims of dominion over the North once hostilities ended. At last, a grand ceremony was arranged in a meadow by the Mander, the broad river that coursed through the Reach. The location was chosen for its natural beauty and central position. Robb and Renly stood before their assembled armies, each king flanked by his greatest lords and sworn swords. A dais of rough-hewn timber had been erected. Upon it stood the two kings, with the silent watchers of thousands of men forming a sea of steel and color beyond. A hush spread through the gathering as the time arrived for them to speak their vows of alliance. Robb stepped forward first. He gazed out at the faces, the bright banners, the field stretching into the distance. Then he spoke, "Men of the North and men of the South. We stand today not as enemies, but as allies. My father, Eddard Stark, believed in honor and justice, principles that were cast aside by the Lannisters when they took his head. We of the North did not seek war, yet war came to us. Now we join hands with King Renly Baratheon not to conquer, but to bring the killers of my father to justice, to free my sisters, and to restore peace to this realm, even if our paths diverge once that peace is won. Let all here witness that we are bound by oath. We shall fight side by side, share what we have, and defend each other from all threats." He fell silent then, and Renly Baratheon took the step to stand beside him. Renly's voice carried across the meadow, smooth and resonant. "Lords of the Stormlands and the Reach, valiant men who have followed me thus far, we name the Lannisters as traitors to the realm. Their cruelty and deceit must end. To achieve that, we join forces with the North, a people both proud and strong. Many might say that our bond is unlikely, but I say it is necessary. Together, our swords shall ring with righteousness. We will free the innocent from the Red Keep, end the tyranny of the false King Joffrey, and usher in a new era of stability. As a sign of our good faith, we acknowledge the Kingdom of the North as a free realm to be ruled by Robb Stark as its rightful king. Let all here see that I, Renly of House Baratheon, King of the Undulls and the First Men, so swear." A solemn hush hung in the air, and then a wave of cheers erupted. The northern men banged their shields. The knights of the Reach raised their swords. The lords of the Stormlands roared their approval. The demonstration of unity, as tenuous and new as it was, seemed to fill the field with a hopeful sound. Robb felt it in his chest, an echo of possibility. Yes, the war was far from over, but they had taken a step that might change the course of events. He looked to his mother, who stood to one side of the dais, her expression calm yet tinged with relief. She nodded to him, and he felt a swell of gratitude that she had navigated such treacherous waters to bring them here. Amid the throng, the Tyrells watched with cautious optimism. Ser Loras, face flushed from the excitement, clasped the hilt of his sword. Lord Mace Tyrell was present too, a proud grin plastered across his face. It was no secret that the Tyrells wanted Renly on the Iron Throne. Now they had gained a powerful ally to help realize that aim. Meanwhile, the northern lords, men like Great John Umber and Rickard Karstark, stood tall, some wearing fierce grins, others grave with determination. They had come south for vengeance. Now they saw a path to achieving that vengeance more swiftly. The alliance sealed, the two armies fell into a new rhythm. Scouts were dispatched in all directions. War councils convened to plan the next moves. They knew that Tywin Lannister still hovered in the west, a coiled viper ready to strike. They knew King's Landing was heavily garrisoned. They also knew that Stannis Baratheon was out there, claiming that Renly's crown was a usurpation of his rightful place. War was rarely a single-front affair. Yet for the moment, with the combined might of the North and the Southern bannermen under Renly's command, victory seemed possible. Letters were hurriedly penned to propose that Stannis join them. It was a faint hope. Stannis was known for his rigid sense of right and wrong. His claim to the throne by primogeniture was, in his eyes, absolute. Yet if he could be persuaded that Joffrey was a false king and that unity was needed, perhaps a truce could be arranged. In the meantime, the newly allied force marched. Their plan: to swing east, capturing key fortresses loyal to the Lannisters, cutting off supply lines, and tightening a net around King's Landing. Robb saw a dramatic change in his men as they marched alongside Southern knights. The Northerners were accustomed to tough marches, the sting of cold, simpler fare. Now, they mingled with men who had grown up on feasts of fruit, cheeses, and fine pastries. At first, there was tension, the differences in customs sparking curiosity or disdain. But as the miles wore on, the men began to share stories, trade items, and even swap techniques of fighting. The Tyrell archers showed the Northerners a trick or two about quick arrow release, while the Northerners demonstrated how to march efficiently in loose terrain. The shared sense of purpose bound them together faster than any treaty on parchment could. Robb rode with Renly at times, discussing the route and the next objectives. Often he would see Marjorie Tyrell's carriage rolling along behind the main vanguard, protected by her own guards. She would wave at him if she saw him looking her way. It was a strange arrangement to be fighting a war with a queen traveling so close to the front, but perhaps this was how the southern lords did things. Renly seemed to trust that the greatest danger lay not in their immediate path but in the cunning of Tywin Lannister or the unpredictability of Stannis. They captured the small castle of Hayford, still loyal to the crown, with minimal bloodshed. The local lord surrendered upon realizing that two vast armies bore down on him. Renly installed a garrison, stating that the property and the small folk would be spared. Robb nodded his approval. That was one difference he noticed from the Lannisters, who sacked and ravaged without mercy. Renly, for all his flamboyance, sought to rule by winning hearts, not just battles. Soon, word reached them that Stannis had taken up a position near Storm's End but was not yet threatening King's Landing. More pressing were rumors that Tyrion Lannister, now Hand of the King, was strengthening the city's defenses, stockpiling wildfire, and forging alliances with the mercenary companies. None of that was surprising, but it served to remind them that the final clash would be fierce. The allied host established a grand camp 1 day's ride from the gates of King's Landing, spreading across farmland that had long been in disuse. The gold of the banners reflected the setting sun, and the gloom of the day's end seemed to settle on every tent. Archers set up vantage points, while cavalry patrolled the perimeter. Spies were sent in the dead of night to gauge the mood of the city. They returned with stories of high tension. The people feared war, famine, and the uncertain temper of King Joffrey. The Boy King's cruelty had become legend. Tales circulated of him ordering beatings and executions at whim. Robb could not help the seething anger that rose in him. That this callow youth, this child of incest, if rumors were true, should sit so lightly on the throne after murdering Ned Stark, rankled him beyond measure. But fury alone would do no good. They needed a plan. And so the lords gathered around maps in Renly's richly furnished war tent. Catelyn was there, along with Marjorie, who observed quietly. Ser Loras Tyrell stood by his king, while the Blackfish and Grey John Umber flanked Robb. They studied the defenses of King's Landing, the city walls, the gates, the Red Keep perched on Aegon's high hill. Renly proposed that they attempt to negotiate one last time, demanding the release of the Stark girls and Joffrey's abdication. If the Lannisters refused, they would lay siege, surrounding the city on all sides, sealing off the roads and the Rose Road supply line. The Tyrell fleets, though not as large as the Royal Fleet or the Redwyne Fleet, could disrupt shipping in Blackwater Bay. Robb asked how they might deal with the threat of wildfire. Even the slightest mention of those alchemical jars set him on edge, recalling the stories of how King Aerys had planned to burn the city. Renly and his generals admitted they had some intelligence about where the substance might be stored, but there was no sure way to root it all out without infiltration. Still, if the city's defenders used wildfire, they risked destroying themselves as well. Fear might be the greatest weapon to keep it from being used. While these preparations took shape, there came a sudden flurry of riders from the city gates bearing the Lannister lion upon their surcoats. Robb and Renly agreed to let them approach under a flag of truce, though with careful watch. One rider bore a message sealed with the royal sigil. It demanded that the armies break camp and disperse or face the wrath of King Joffrey Baratheon. The letter threatened that any attempt to breach the city walls would be met with fire and blood. Robb felt a twist of rage reading those words, recalling how Joffrey had crowed over his father's death. But Renly only laughed, tossing the letter aside, calling it a child's bluster. The riders were sent back unharmed, carrying a formal declaration they would remain in place and further negotiation would be welcomed so long as it included the immediate release of Sansa and Arya Stark. A single day later, an emaciated raven arrived at their camp. It was from Sansa, smuggled out by an unknown friend within the castle. The letter was short, shaky, describing her fear and isolation. Arya's whereabouts were unknown to her, only that she was said to be missing. Sansa begged her brother to help. Robb read it with trembling hands. Anger and sorrow warred in him. Catelyn, reading over his shoulder, pressed her lips into a thin line, her eyes bright with tears. Renly pledged to do all in his power to rescue Sansa. The oath struck a chord in Robb's chest. For the first time, he felt a surge of genuine gratitude toward the Southern King. Soon after, the final siege preparations began. The grand host advanced, forming two distinct wings. One, led by Renly, approached the city from the south near the Rose Road. The other, commanded by Robb, swung to the north, cutting off the King's Road. Siege towers were built, catapults readied. The men constructed lines of earthen ramparts, sharpened stakes, trenches. It was the largest siege that King's Landing had faced since Robert's rebellion. Inside the walls, panic surely spread among the smallfolk. Robb wondered how many innocent people would suffer if the Lannisters refused to yield. If only the city's inhabitants knew that once the Lannisters were brought to heel, Renly intended to rule more mercifully. But perhaps he thought many within those walls had heard too many lies to trust easily. In the nights that followed, the city was an ominous silhouette against the moon. Torchlights flickered along the ramparts, occasionally illuminating the shapes of Lannister guards. Robb's scouts reported an unusual quiet. Perhaps the defenders were conserving resources, or perhaps they simply waited. The tension, coiled and sharp, hung over the encampments. Soldiers huddled around fires, whispering about the possibility of an all-out assault. Others prayed to their gods, be they the old gods, the Seven, or both. Robb moved among his men, heart heavy yet resolute. Then, amid the standoff, a development, another rider came, not from the city but from the east, carrying a banner of House Baratheon, Stannis' sigil. He bore a letter from Stannis himself. In it, the elder Baratheon raged against Renly's claim to the throne, calling it an affront to the laws of inheritance. However, Stannis acknowledged that the Lannisters were the true enemy, and he proposed that if Renly abdicated in favor of Stannis, then Stannis would welcome the North's independence as well, seeing it as a lesser evil. It was the same situation in reverse. Each brother demanded the crown as rightful. Both offered recognition of the North's freedom. A wedge was forming between the allied host. Some of Renly's men whispered that Stannis had a stronger legal claim. Others insisted Renly was the better ruler. Robb himself found it troubling. If both brothers offered the same concessions, who was truly the rightful king? Yet the alliance was sealed, and Renly had proven far more amenable in practice. Stannis was notorious for his sternness, his unwavering sense of justice. Robb suspected that even if he accepted the North's independence now, he might rescind it once in power, citing the letter of the law. He would not betray Renly, not when their armies were poised before King's Landing. So, the letter went unanswered. The path before them was set. Finally, envoys from King's Landing emerged once more under a flag of truce. This time, it was none other than Tyrion Lannister himself, flanked by gold-cloaked guards and sporting a measured smile. Renly, Robb, and their principal lords met him near the forward lines, a tension in the air so thick it felt as though one spark would set off battle. The dwarf dismounted carefully, his mismatched eyes scanning the array of forces. He had a quick wit, that much Robb remembered from stories. Tyrion offered a greeting that was sardonic at best. "I see you've brought a few friends with you," he quipped, gesturing to the immense armies. "We have," Renly replied evenly, "the same friends who will see you and your family removed from power if you do not surrender my good brother's daughters." Tyrion sked. "A pity, but I fear King Joffrey will not be parted from his beloved fiancée so easily. Sansa is quite important to him, you see. And as for Arya, well, there have been complications." Robb clenched his fists, but he kept his voice steady. "Release them and open the gates. Surrender Joffrey to our justice, and no harm need come to the city. Your people will be spared." Tyrion's face hardened. "We have archers stationed on the walls, scorpions, and something more potent. If you attempt an assault, you risk turning the city into a pyre." Renly's tone was cold. "We've all heard the stories. Your father used wildfire before. But if you think we will be so easily cowed, you underestimate our resolve. We hold the Rose Road and the King's Road. The city will starve in weeks." A flicker of something crossed Tyrion's face. Worry, perhaps. He glanced from Renly to Robb, then to Catelyn. He spoke again, voice lowered. "I have no wish to see the city starve, nor to see more blood spilled. I offer a compromise. The girls will be freed if you withdraw your armies to a safe distance, granting time for negotiations on all claims to the throne." There was a pause. Robb stared hard at the dwarf, suspecting a trick. He shifted, glancing at Renly, who merely tilted his head. The proposition was tempting, Sansa's safety was paramount. But if they withdrew, they might lose the advantage and the Lannisters could rally. "How long?" Robb asked quietly. "A fortnight," Tyrion replied. "Long enough to see if cooler heads can fashion a truce. Too many men are set on each other's destruction. Let's prevent further tragedy. And I do give you my word on Sansa's return." Robb felt his mother's hand on his arm. He knew she wanted Sansa free above all else. He turned to Renly. The Southern King rubbed his chin, seeming to weigh the cost. At length, Renly spoke. You will deliver Lady Sansa Stark at once, with the knowledge that her sister must also be turned over as soon as she's found. Then we shall consider the withdrawal. No unconditional withdrawal will be granted without the girl's safety assured. Tyrion nodded slowly. I will speak to the king, but I make no promises on the timeline. Will you at least promise not to storm the gates while I negotiate for her release? Robb hesitated. To break a parley's peace was dishonorable. We give you 3 days, he said. If by that time you have not returned Lady Sansa to us, we will take that as refusal and act accordingly. Tyrion studied their faces. Finally, he shrugged. 3 days, then. Pray that the gods grant me success in reasoning with those behind the walls. With that, Tyrion and his escort departed, riding back under the watchful gaze of thousands of swords. A new tension gripped the allied camp. 3 days they would wait, but if the Lannisters stalled, all bets were off. Some men were relieved at the possibility of peace, others scoffed at it. The great Jon spat, calling it a delaying tactic. The Tyrell lords seemed divided, some urging caution, others eager for swift conquest. Robb vacillated between hope and dread. He prayed to the old gods that Sansa would be freed, but he also steeled himself for disappointment. On the second day, a single rider from the city arrived, bearing a letter that claimed negotiations were ongoing, but that Joffrey was stubborn. That same evening, a cluster of men from the city tried to slip past the Allied lines but were captured. They turned out to be Goldcloaks deserting, claiming that the city was on the brink of revolt. They told harrowing tales of Joffrey's cruelty, how the small folk suffered while the king feasted. Dawn on the third day was gray and heavy with clouds, threatening rain. Robb stood on a slight rise, gazing at King's Landing in the distance. Renly joined him, quiet for a long moment. Then Renly said, if they do not bring her, we strike. Robb nodded. And the city burns, perhaps? He saw a trace of discomfort in Renly's features. None of them wanted to destroy the city, but war left few choices. The hours dragged on with excruciating slowness. A light rain began to fall. Then, just after midday, a procession emerged from the gates. Robb's heart pounded. He seized his sword belt, calling his horse. Renly did the same, and together, with a handful of men, they rode forward cautiously. The procession was small, a covered carriage, flanked by Goldcloak guards with a single rider bearing the Lannister lion. As they neared, Robb's eyes narrowed, searching for any sign of his sister. The carriage stopped and a slight figure in a cloak was helped down. Robb let out a ragged breath. It was Sansa. Pale, thinner than he remembered, but alive. She looked around with wide, frightened eyes. At the sight of him, tears welled. He spurred his horse forward. The Goldcloaks tensed, hands on the hilts of the iron swords, but made no move to stop him. Robb slid from the saddle and caught Sansa in his arms, the cloak tumbling from her shoulders. She trembled in relief, sobbing into his chest. He felt tears burning at the corners of his own eyes. For a moment, the war was far away. This was his sister. She was alive, safe in his arms. One of the Goldcloaks cleared his throat, addressing Robb. On behalf of the king, we deliver Lady Sansa Stark as a gesture of good faith. The matter of Lady Arya remains uncertain. We ask that you honor your agreement to withdraw your forces for the time being to allow further negotiations. Robb held Sansa close, looking past her to the guard. We said 3 days, he replied, voice thick. You have met the condition of returning, my sister. We will withdraw to a distance of 5 leagues, but not further. He glanced at Renly, who nodded. That had been the plan if Sansa was returned. They would fall back slightly, giving the city some space, continuing negotiations for Arya. That was the compromise hammered out. Rain pattered around them as the guard took the message and rode off. Sansa, shivering, clung to her brother. She was exhausted from fear and captivity, but relief poured from her. Robb guided her gently into his own escort. He saw Catelyn galloping up, her expression a mixture of fury and joy. She dismounted and gathered Sansa in her arms, crying softly. Robb's heart felt near to bursting for a moment, seeing them reunited. But the mention of Arya tempered his joy. She was still missing, and the city claimed ignorance. He vowed silently he would not rest until he found her. That evening, a wave of relief spread through the Allied camp. The return of one Stark girl was a tangible victory, a symbol that the Lannisters were not as all-powerful as they pretended. Morale soared. Ser Loras congratulated Robb, patting his shoulder with surprising warmth. Marjorie Tyrell came to see Sansa, offering a kind of gentle sisterly care, bringing fresh clothing, ensuring the girl ate a proper meal. Sansa spoke little at first, mostly clinging to her mother and brother. Yet in time she found her voice, telling them what she knew of Arya. She had last seen her on the day King Joffrey had Ned executed. Arya fled, vanishing into the city. Sansa suspected she might have escaped, but was not certain. Tears wet her cheeks as she recounted the cruelties she had witnessed in the Red Keep, the mocking japes of the court. Robb and Catelyn listened with grim faces. Even Renly, upon hearing the story, seemed outraged. As twilight settled, Renly called a council. He suggested they honor the request to withdraw temporarily, showing that they were not mere brigands. This would lend credibility to further negotiations and might hasten Arya's return if indeed the Lannisters found her. However, they would maintain a blockade to prevent supplies from entering or leaving the city. No sense allowing the Lannisters to gather more strength. Robb agreed, though he still felt uneasy. He wanted to press on, to tear down the walls and rescue Arya, but that risked losing what they had just gained. He consoled himself with the knowledge that Sansa was safe at last, resting in his tent with their mother standing guard. Over the next week, the Allied army shifted position. A wide perimeter was established, just beyond arrow range of the walls. Negotiations continued through letters. Tyrion pressed them to lift the blockade entirely. Renly refused, stating no more concessions would be made unless Arya was produced. Tyrion's letters grew increasingly desperate in tone, describing food shortages, unrest in the streets, Joffrey's erratic behavior. There was talk of the Queen Regent, Cersei, intervening, but she was equally stubborn. All the while, a sense of stalemate took hold. Then, without warning, a thunderous development shook the entire region. Word reached them that Tywin Lannister had been defeated in a decisive skirmish near Harrenhal by Roose Bolton, who had cunningly drawn the Lannister forces into a boggy field. Reports suggested Tywin's host was in disarray, retreating westward with heavy losses. This meant that the bulk of Lannister's strength away from the city was now broken, leaving only the city garrison under Joffrey and whatever loyalists remained to hold the capital. The news created a stir in the Allied camp. Renly's men cheered. The Northerners were beside themselves with glee. Seizing this momentum, Renly called for an immediate siege, no more half measures. If the Lannisters' main host was scattered, then the capital was ripe for the taking. Robb hesitated only briefly before agreeing. Arya had not been returned and negotiations had stalled. Perhaps the surest way to find his sister was to storm the city and flush out whoever held her. They began to move siege engines forward once again, digging new trenches, building earthen ramparts, and establishing a more thorough blockade at every gate. The intention was not to starve the city into submission over months. Renly wanted a swift victory, and Robb concurred. But that meant risk. The second siege of King's Landing began in earnest. Archers peppered the walls day by day while the city's defenders fired back. A drumbeat of catapult fire thundered during daylight hours, hurling stones at the battlements. Renly's infantry tested the gates, though the defenders poured boiling oil and quarrels down upon them. Robb oversaw the northern troops who attacked from the north side of the city while Renly concentrated on the southern approach. Smoke drifted from scattered fires along the ramparts. At times, the wind carried the smell of burned flesh and death. War was truly upon them. Yet it was a more measured assault than many a siege in history. Robb and Renly wanted to minimize civilian casualties. They had no quarrel with the small folk who were pawns in the game. Messengers were shouted up to the walls, promising amnesty for anyone who laid down arms. Some goldcloaks did desert, climbing over the walls at night. Others remained loyal out of fear or gold. Meanwhile, inside the Red Keep, Joffrey and Cersei presumably raged, refusing to surrender. Tyrion Lannister's letters ceased, suggesting he had been overruled. After a week of battering, the city showed signs of faltering. One of the gates had cracked under repeated blows from Renly's rams. The defenders attempted repairs, but desertions increased daily. Food grew scarcer. The roars of the crowd within the city sometimes echoed over the walls, riots, if rumors were correct. Robb prayed that Arya was safe, that she was hidden or had escaped. If the city fell, there would be chaos, and he worried about how she might be caught in the fray. Finally, a crucial point was reached. The main gate, the King's Gate, crashed open under relentless pounding. Renly's knights poured through, flooding the streets in a rolling tide of steel and banners. The city's defenders mounted a desperate stand, but they were disorganized, lacking strong leadership. Robb's forces poured in from another gate, seizing control of the courtyard. Smoke shrouded the air, and men clashed in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Chaos erupted as some within the city took up arms to defend their homes, while others greeted the Allied troops as liberators from Lannister misrule. Robb, astride a warhorse, led his men carefully through the northern districts, ensuring no wanton slaughter or pillaging took place. He commanded that any soldier who abused the innocent would face harsh punishment. He saw frightened families cowering in doorways, and he had no desire to add to their suffering. The Northmen under his banner were mostly disciplined, though a few had to be reined in by their officers. Smoke spiraled from the direction of Flea Bottom. Evidently, the chaos was worse there. Renly's knights tried to establish order, but the city was a maze of twisting alleys and dense buildings. Yet, amid the swirl of conflict, the allied forces steadily pressed towards the Red Keep. If Joffrey, Cersei, or any highborn Lannister loyalists remained there, that would be the final stand. When Robb reached the Red Keep's outer gate, he found it already in a state of panic. The Goldcloaks had thrown down their arms, refusing to die for a lost cause. Renly himself, shining in golden armor spattered with blood and grime, rode at the head of a cavalry detachment, Ser Loras at his side. The gates to the Red Keep were barred from within, but a handful of men battered at them with a giant ram, while archers on siege towers loosed arrows at the walls. The defenders inside the keep returned fire sporadically, but their numbers seemed few. It felt as though the castle was collapsing from within. Then a final crash echoed as the gates splintered. Renly's men poured through, yelling victory cries. Robb followed swiftly, a portion of his own men behind him. They surged into the courtyard. There, in the half-ruined gloom, they found the remnants of Joffrey's guard, a small cluster of Kingsguard knights, gold cloaks, and frightened courtiers. And there was King Joffrey himself, perched on a dais near the doors to the Great Hall, flanked by Cersei Lannister. The boy king wore a golden crown that looked too large for his head, and his face was twisted in a mixture of fury and terror. The moment he saw the wave of soldiers, he scrambled behind the king's guard, shouting incoherent threats. Cersei's face went ashen, yet she tried to maintain some regal composure. Renly dismounted in a fluid motion, striding forward with his sword drawn. Robb, likewise, advanced, though he felt an overwhelming urge to strike Joffrey down for what he had done to Ned. Still, he forced himself to remain calm. Joffrey glared at them both, voice shrill. "You have no right. I am the king. I'll have your heads." Renly's tone was almost pitying. "Your reign has brought only cruelty. Surrender, and you may live." Cersei hissed at them, eyes darting about for a possible escape. The king guard seemed uncertain, glancing from Joffrey to the invading kings. One of them, Ser Meryn Trant, dropped his sword in despair. Another, Ser Boros Blunt, looked petrified. Only one knight, perhaps the Hound if he were present, might have put up a real fight, but he was nowhere in sight. So the standoff ended quickly, with the defenders losing heart. Joffrey screamed again, calling for them to burn the city with wildfire. But Tyrion Lannister appeared from a side door, disheveled and tense. "It's done, Joffrey," he snapped. "There is no more city to save if you do that. Surrender." At that, Joffrey's eyes bulged and tears brimmed with fury and fear. He seemed on the verge of some final, desperate act. But Cersei pulled him back. Tyrion approached, raising his hands in a show of helplessness. "I tried to spare bloodshed, but I was outmaneuvered. If you must have a Lannister's head, take mine, but spare the innocents." He shot Joffrey a contemptuous look. Renly and Robb exchanged glances. Robb turned his gaze on Tyrion, remembering the vow to rescue his sisters. "What of my sister Arya?" he demanded. Tyrion shook his head, regret etched in his features. "I do not know. She fled. She's not here. My men tried to find her, to protect her, but she vanished from the city months ago. That's the truth." A flicker of rage coursed through Robb, but he sensed no lie in Tyrion's words. The diminutive Lannister had always been cunning, but in this moment he seemed exhausted and genuine. Robb grimaced, thinking Arya might indeed be somewhere out in the wild, lost or in hiding. At least Sansa was safe. Renly stepped closer, pointing his sword. "Joffrey Baratheon, your misrule ends here. You are accused of treason, murder, and tyranny. Will you yield?" Trembling, Joffrey looked to his mother. Cersei was frantic, tears shining in her eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice failed. Finally, Joffrey shrieked a defiant, "Never!" But the next moment, he bolted, pushing past Cersei, trying to flee into the Red Keep's corridors. Ser Loras moved swiftly, seizing the boy by the arm before he got 2 steps. Joffrey screeched, struggling, but Renly barked an order. 2 knights pinned him, wrenching the sword from his hand. Cersei lunged, claws out, but was restrained by one of Renly's men. She collapsed in hysterics, screaming. And so, in a muddy courtyard thick with the smell of smoke, blood, and fear, King Joffrey Baratheon was taken prisoner. A hush spread across the yard. Tyrion made no move to intervene, simply watching with a hollow expression. Some of the gold cloaks sank to their knees in surrender. Elsewhere in the city, the last pockets of resistance collapsed. The war for King's Landing was over, and Renly Baratheon stood triumphant, side by side with Robb Stark. That night, the victorious armies strove to restore order. They patrolled the streets, preventing looting as best they could. Renly commanded that the small folk be fed from the Red Keep stores. Robb assisted, dispatching northern soldiers to keep the peace in outlying districts. They found the city in a sorry state, but at least it had not burned. War always left scars, but they had a chance to minimize the damage. In the great hall of the Red Keep, Renly sat on the Iron Throne. Ser Loras stood at his right, Marjorie by his side, wearing an expression both regal and strangely distant at the sight of all the carnage. Robb stood to Renly's left, with Sansa and Catelyn near him. Guards brought in Joffrey, now stripped of his crown, wrists bound. The hall was filled with lords and knights, a swirl of onlookers. Cersei was not present. She had been locked in a chamber under guard to keep her from causing more havoc. Tyrion stood off to the side, outwardly composed but pale. In a clear, ringing voice, Renly proclaimed that Joffrey would face trial for his crimes, and that in the interim, he would be confined to a secure tower. He recognized Robb Stark's sovereignty over the north, reaffirming the alliance. He also signaled that the other lords of Westeros could come forward to swear fealty if they so chose, or to declare neutrality. It was a bold statement signifying a new era. The watchers in the hall murmured among themselves. Some were uncertain about the future. Others, seeing Joffrey's downfall, were ready to kneel if it meant survival. Robb, for his part, had only one concern in that moment: the well-being of Sansa, safe at last, and the search for Arya. He stepped forward, his voice carrying in the hall. "My sister's freedom was what I fought for. One sister is returned. The other remains missing. Let it be known, the king in the north will not rest until Arya Stark is found. Any who has word of her whereabouts, bring it to me, and you shall be richly rewarded." Renly nodded, eyes grave. All in this hall heed King Robb's words. Let the search begin in earnest. Then he turned to Tyrion. "As for you, Lord Tyrion, your fate is uncertain, but you showed restraint in the final hours. We shall see if that weighs in your favor during the trials to come." Tyrion dipped his head, offering neither thanks nor protest. He was a prisoner still, though perhaps one with some measure of respect. Thus, the newly claimed king of the south, for that was how many now called Renly, though he still styled himself king of the Seven Kingdoms, and the king in the north set about reshaping the realm. In the days that followed, Renly's men established order in King's Landing. Food was distributed, criminals were punished, and attempts were made to mend the city's wounds. The Northmen prepared for departure, eager to return home, yet mindful that Stannis Baratheon still loomed to the east, that Tywin Lannister was not entirely destroyed, and that the Greyjoys in the Iron Islands might see an opportunity for their own ambitions. The realm was far from stable, but for a moment a fragile peace settled on King's Landing. The combined armies that had marched under the banners of the Stag, the Rose, and the Direwolf had accomplished what once seemed impossible, unseating the Lannisters from their seat of power, capturing Joffrey, and restoring some semblance of hope to the war-torn kingdom. Robb spent time with his mother and Sansa, comforting the latter as she began to heal from her ordeal. He could see the effect it had on her, no longer the dreamy girl she once was, but someone who had glimpsed the true horrors of power. She found some measure of solace in the company of Marjorie Tyrell, who showed her small kindnesses. Lady Catelyn, meanwhile, walked through the Red Keep's corridors with sorrowful eyes, remembering the last time she was here with Ned. The ghosts of the past were thick in the air. At length, Robb and Catelyn had a private meeting with Renly, during which they formally ratified the final terms of their alliance in writing. Renly recognized the king in the north as a sovereign ruler. Robb pledged that his men would fight alongside Renly should Stannis or the remnants of the Lannisters threaten them. In the Great Hall, the signatures were penned, and with that stroke of quill upon parchment, a new era was born, at least for now. Still, war did not fade so easily. Stannis Baratheon's fleet was said to be massing near Dragonstone. Tywin Lannister might rally from the west. The Greyjoys eyed the coasts, and no one knew what might arise from Dorne or across the Narrow Sea. But in King's Landing, at least, the tide had changed. An unlikely alliance had proven its might, forging a path through blood and steel to shape a realm that might, just might, heal from the wounds inflicted by the Lannisters' tyranny. On the morning Robb prepared to leave the city, bound for the Riverlands and ultimately the north, he stood on the battlements overlooking the Blackwater Bay. The sea gleamed under a pale sun. Soldiers bustled below, and the tattered banners of the Lannister lion lay discarded, replaced by the crowned stag of Baratheon and the rose of Tyrell. Somewhere among those banners, a few dire wolves waved proudly, a testament that the North had come so far from home and emerged victorious in one battle at least. Grey wind padded to his side, sniffing at the air. Robb stroked the direwolf's thick fur, thinking of Winterfell, thinking of Arya still out there, somewhere. He prayed once more for her safety. Catelyn approached, wrapping a cloak around her shoulders. "We head north soon," she said softly. "There is much to rebuild in the Riverlands, and in time we'll go back to Winterfell. Sansa will recover. She has a resilient heart, even if it doesn't seem so now." Robb nodded. "Aye. We have done what we set out to do, avenge father by dethroning the boy king who ordered his death. But the realm remains fractured." He exhaled, a wave of fatigue washing over him. He was still so young, but the burdens of kingship sat heavily on his shoulders. His mother placed a hand on his arm. "We have an ally. Let us hope that alliance stands firm in the trials to come." Below them, a company of knights rode out, their armor gleaming, fresh from victory. In the distance, the city's people began to stir, venturing out from their homes with tentative curiosity. The sunrise caught the spires of the Red Keep, igniting them in golden light. For better or worse, a new day dawned upon King's Landing and all of Westeros. Robb Stark, king in the north, stood in the breeze, letting the salt air fill his lungs. The war was not over, but this chapter had closed. With Renly Baratheon's southern alliance, a glimmer of hope shone in the battered Seven Kingdoms. He prayed it would be enough to guide them toward a future free of the Lannisters' cruelty and the shadow of endless war. If nothing else, he had proven the no. RTH's strength and honor on the southern stage, forging a path forward that might save countless lives. That, at least, was a legacy worth fighting for. Robb Stark stood in the Red Keep's courtyard at first light, head bowed as he listened to the distant murmur of a city still reeling from change. Only a handful of days had passed since the allied host of Northmen and Southerners loyal to Renly Baratheon breached the gates of King's Landing, capturing the boy King Joffrey and scattering his defenders. In that short time, the capital had grown quieter, as if trying to understand its new masters. Outside the keep's walls, people crept through charred streets and broken alleys, warily eyeing the soldiers posted to keep order. Within the keep, a different kind of tension reigned, a knot of powerful men and women allied by treaty, uncertain how to hold together in the aftermath of conquest. Catelyn Stark approached her son, her footsteps echoing lightly on the worn stones. Robb turned and offered a faint, weary smile. The sight of her brought him comfort. They had Sansa back, safe if still shaken, yet Arya was gone, lost somewhere in the vastness of the realm. That sorrow gnawed at him even now. When he closed his eyes, he sometimes saw his little sister wielding a wooden sword in Winterfell's courtyard. He tried to cling to the hope that she would find her way home, or that he could somehow find her once he saw to the final duties that bound him here. "You haven't slept," Catelyn said gently, resting a hand on his shoulder. "I can see it in your eyes." He exhaled, letting the early morning air tinged with the lingering smoke of recent skirmishes fill his lungs. A king can't always sleep when he pleases. A hint of bitterness threaded his voice, but he did not mean it harshly. They had agreed, in principle, that the North would soon depart the capital. Renly Baratheon was on the Iron Throne, crowned king of the Seven Kingdoms by those in the city who recognized his victory. Yet the realm hardly felt united. The Tyrells pressed for swift consolidation of power. Lannister loyalists hunkered down or fled. Stannis Baratheon remained a looming threat in the east, bitterly proclaiming that the throne was his by rights. The Northmen, for their part, wanted only to bring their forces home. Many were sick of southern lands, southern wars, and the heartbreak they had faced since Ned Stark's death. "I can't blame you if you want to leave," Catelyn admitted. "We've done what we set out to do, ended Joffrey's rule and avenged your father. You've made good on the alliance with Renly. At least for the moment, we have a measure of peace." Robb cast a glance at the keep's high walls. Banners had been changed. Where once the lion of Lannister snarled and the stag of Joffrey's lineage flew, now Renly's crowned stag and the rose of House Tyrell were far more prominent. A few wolf banners still fluttered on the ramparts, though many northern banners had been stowed away, ready for the march home. "We're nearly ready," he said softly. "But I must speak with Renly one last time. I want his pledge in writing regarding the North. We've already signed an alliance, but I need clarity on trade routes, on the shipment of grain from the Reach. The Riverlands were ravaged by the Lannisters. Our people will need southern provisions, at least until we can harvest again." I can't fail them by leaving too many details uncertain. Catelyn nodded, tucking a stray strand of auburn hair behind her ear. You've grown wise for your years, Robb. Your father would be proud. He let her words warm him even as a certain sadness lay beneath them. He'd had to become a man of war and politics far faster than he'd ever wanted. And once that is done, we can go, he murmured. Sansa will come too. She wants to see Winterfell again. She hardly believes it's real anymore after everything she's seen. Bitterness flickered in his chest at the thought of Joffrey's cruelty. The boy king now languished in a cell, awaiting trial. Some demanded his head. Others counseled caution. Still, Joffrey was powerless at last. Catelyn slid her hand away from Robb's shoulder. Then see it done. Renly is expecting you in the small council chamber. I'll speak with Sansa, she's been asking about the journey north. Robb managed a small nod. He watched his mother go, the morning light catching the edges of her cloak. Then he drew a deep breath and strode through the courtyard doors into the keep's corridors, where guards in golden half-armor bowed at his passing. These were Renly's men, or Tyrell men, or else swords pledged from various southern houses that had joined the cause. Many recognized him as the king in the north, though he wore no crown in these halls. He had never felt entirely at ease with the trappings of royalty. Perhaps that was a northern trait, practical, unsentimental. The corridors were quieter than they had been in the days following the siege. No more frantic demands for grain distribution or immediate negotiations with frightened merchants. Order had settled in, if only precariously. He passed a group of serving girls who dipped their heads, eyes cautious as they observed him. Rumors of the dire wolf who followed this young king had spread swiftly. Some told stories of a beast with eyes of hellfire, devouring any foe. Others said it was a spirit protecting the Starks from mortal harm. Robb knew it was just Grey Wind, a living creature, loyal but fearsome to behold. He made his way to the small council chamber, its double doors guarded by a pair of tall reach knights. They let him pass without a word. Inside, torches still burned. The King's Landing mornings were often dim, thanks to the heavy cloud that hung in the air, tainted by the aftermath of fires and battle. Seated at the long table were several figures. Renly Baratheon himself at the head, wearing a rich green doublet with a golden crown shaped like antlers perched on his cropped hair. Margaery Tyrell, poised and observant, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Ser Loras Tyrell, clad in polished armor, standing watchful at the queen's side, and Tyrion Lannister, looking surprisingly calm despite being, for all intents, a prisoner or perhaps a forced advisor. Robb had heard rumors that Renly might keep Tyrion on as some form of counsel, not out of trust, but out of recognition for the dwarf's sharp mind. A handful of lords from the Stormlands and the Reach completed the gathering. King Robb, Renly said, standing with a courteous inclination of his head. His smile was polished, if a touch strained. We were just discussing the matter of Lord Tywin Lannister's defeated forces. We suspect he's regrouping somewhere to the west, though our scouts' reports remain unclear. Robb took a seat near the end of the table, nodding a greeting to those assembled. I don't doubt Tywin is still dangerous, he replied, but my men are eager to return north to protect our borders and begin rebuilding. We've had more than enough southern campaigning. Indeed, Renly said, exchanging a glance with Margaery. I have no desire to keep you from your homeland, King Robb. The North has fought valiantly. Our alliance stands as we agreed. A hush spread across the chamber. Tyrion Lannister sat very still, his eyes flicking from speaker to speaker. Robb wondered if Tyrion feared for his life, or if he was simply biding his time, waiting for an opportunity. He decided it hardly mattered. The man was cunning, but unarmed. He posed no immediate threat. Renly continued, You wish to depart soon, I know. And I wish to ensure that our mutual interests remain protected. As king, I intend to secure the stability of these lands, no small task, given that my brother Stannis is massing ships near Dragonstone and Lord Tywin may yet cause trouble in the west. Furthermore, the Dornish have remained silent, neither openly supporting nor opposing my claim. The realm is large, and many are uncertain where to place their allegiance. Robb inclined his head. These are your tasks, your grace, he said, the formality tasting strange on his tongue, but it was an easier courtesy now that the alliance was sealed. For the North, we only asked to be left unmolested. We'd have trade routes open, as we discussed, so that our people might recover from the ravages of this war. And in return, if you should need support against the Lannisters again, we will honor the alliance. But the North will never again bend the knee to the Iron Throne. We stand as our own kingdom. At that, Margaery Tyrell's expression softened. She spoke in a gentle voice. We've drawn up the formal documents to that effect, ensuring the Riverlands are likewise protected. The devastation inflicted by Lord Tywin's host must be remedied, not repeated. House Tyrell can offer grain shipments to aid the river lords, at least through the coming winter. My Lord Father, Mace Tyrell, has promised as much. It was precisely what Robb needed to hear. He nodded gratefully. My uncle Edmure Tully will be pleased to receive such support at Riverrun. He's labored to hold the castle against repeated attacks. A murmur of agreement passed around the table. A Stormlands lord in the corner cleared his throat. Will you be leaving men here in the capital, King Robb? Or do you withdraw entirely? We've no love for King's Landing, Robb answered without malice, simply stating fact. I'll leave a small delegation, some of my lords who wish to see how matters progress. But my armies will go home. Renly gave a measured nod, then gestured to a pair of scribes who stood by the wall, inkpots and quills at the ready. In that case, let us finalize the terms of your departure, including these new provisions. Then we'll part as friends and allies. Parchments were brought forth. Robb scanned the words carefully. Much of it echoed the pact they had already sealed. A pledge of peace between the Kingdom of the North and the realm ruled by Renly, along with mutual defense in the face of Lannister aggression. The new clauses specified shipments of grain and other resources to flow north along the King's Road, with fair tariffs. Renly, in turn, asked that the North refrain from allying with Stannis or any other pretender to the throne. Robb found that condition easy enough to accept. He had no desire to be drawn into more southern politics. Once the scribes finished, Renly took up a quill, affixed his signature with a practiced flourish, and then offered it to Robb. Robb hesitated a moment, thinking of the men who had died in the Whispering Wood, the blood spilled at the twins, the heartbreak of seeing his father's head on a spike. But forging a better path forward was precisely what they had fought for. So he signed, pressing the quill firmly. The wax was sealed with both sigils, the Crown Stag and the Direwolf. A quiet cheer rose in the chamber. Marjorie Tyrell smiled in earnest, and some Stormlander lords applauded lightly. Tyrion offered a faint nod, perhaps acknowledging that a new political shape had come to Westeros. In that moment, Robb felt a sense of release, as if a heavy weight had shifted from his shoulders. He still bore the mantle of kingship, still had the duty to find Arya, but at least one chapter of the war had ended. Renly poured wine into 2 goblets and extended one to Robb. "Shall we drink on it?" he asked, his eyes gleaming. "Let the realm know that the king in the south and the king in the north are allies indeed." Robb took the cup. The vintage was likely from the arbor, rich and heady. He raised it. "To peace, however fragile it may be," he said softly, and Renly echoed the words. The lords drank. Marjorie sipped from her own cup, gaze bright with hope. Ser Loras remained standing, though he, too, nodded in approval. Tyrion merely pursed his lips. "To peace," he murmured, then set down a goblet he'd been nursing. Robb recognized the tension in the dwarf's posture. This outcome was not the one House Lannister had planned for, but Tyrion's cunning had allowed him to survive under the new regime. No doubt he was already scheming to carve out a tolerable existence in Renly's court. Business concluded quickly after that. Renly asked that Robb remain in King's Landing a few more days for ceremonial appearances to soothe the city's nerves. Even if the North was withdrawing, the small folk needed to see that there was unity rather than a sudden departure. Robb agreed, albeit reluctantly. With Sansa's safety assured and the alliance sealed, he yearned to ride north. But he recognized the wisdom of leaving under a banner of cooperation, not suspicion. His lords would accept a minor delay if it meant strengthening the legitimacy of the North's new independence. When the meeting dispersed, Robb found himself briefly alone with Marjorie Tyrell near the door. She was a slender woman of quiet grace, and she carried herself with a confidence that belied her youth. She clasped her hands before her, gazing at him thoughtfully. "Your sister Sansa is well, I trust?" she asked, polite concern in her tone. "She's still so young, and after all she suffered." "I tried to help her settle in." Robb offered a small bow of his head. "I appreciate it. She speaks kindly of your efforts. Once we're gone, I hope she'll heal away from these walls. Every corner of the Red Keep must remind her of what happened to our father." Marjorie's lips curved in a soft smile, tinged with sympathy. "She is welcome to remain as a lady-in-waiting if that was her wish, but I understand why she would not." Will you see her wed someday to consolidate alliances, as is so often done? Robb's breath caught. We haven't spoken of that. Not after everything she's endured. My mother and I just want her to feel safe again. She was betrothed to Joffrey under duress, and we saw how that turned out. Of course, Marjorie murmured. May the gods grant her gentler days ahead. Safe travels to you, King Robb. I pray that your reign in the north brings your people prosperity. Thank you, he said simply. For an instant, he almost smiled. But then memory pricked him. The war was far from truly finished, and winter was always coming. He left Marjorie then and made his way through the corridors to the upper floors of Maegor's Holdfast, where Sansa and Catelyn had been given comfortable rooms. He found Sansa seated on a window seat, gazing out over the city. She wore a pale blue gown, simple but well cut, and her hair fell softly around her shoulders, a style reminiscent of a girl who had once dreamed only of courtly romance. Yet her eyes bore the shadows of experience now. Sansa, he greeted gently, stepping inside. She turned, and a fragile smile graced her lips as she stood to greet him. Robb, you finished your meeting. Her voice still carried the careful courtesy she'd honed in King's Landing. It pained him to hear it, but he knew it was just one of many scars. Aye. The agreements are sealed. We'll depart in a few days. Sansa gave a soft exhale of relief. I want to see Winterfell again, she said quietly. Sometimes I close my eyes and try to remember how it looked in the snow, how the hot springs made the air steam, how the trees and the gods would whisper in the wind. I fear I'll find it changed, or that I'll find myself changed. But I long to see it all the same. He approached and took her hand gently in his. Winterfell may be quiet now that Bran and Rickon are there without us, but it's still our home. You'll find comfort there, and we'll all help each other heal. Her eyes misted over, though she didn't cry. Thank you, she whispered. I keep thinking of Arya. I hope we hear some news of her. We will, Robb said, with more conviction than he felt. She's strong. Father always said she had the wolf's blood. Sansa nodded, her lips trembling with unspoken worries. Robb squeezed her hand, then released it. I'll let you rest. Mother said she was going to speak with you about the journey. Pack only what you need. Most of our things are on the wagons already. And keep to Grey Wind if you can, he'll protect you on the road. She lowered her gaze to the floor for a moment. He's a fierce creature, your dire wolf. The Lannisters were terrified of him, I heard. Robb nodded, a hint of satisfaction stirring. I'd trust him with my life. Sansa managed a final, fleeting smile. So would I. He left her then, letting the door close gently. Outside, he encountered Catelyn, who stood quietly in the hallway. She gave him an approving look. She's stronger than she knows, his mother said. We must let her find her own footing. She will, Robb agreed. And we'll guide her. As they walked down the hallway, the sense of finality pressed closer. The homeward journey would not be easy. There were still rumors of Iron-born raiders troubling the coasts and scattered Lannister sympathizers lingering in pockets of the Riverlands. Yet nothing would keep him from the north now. As soon as Renly held his coronation ceremonies in the city and publicly reaffirmed the alliance, Robb meant to lead his men out. That evening, a curious quiet settled over King's Landing. Robb dined in a smaller hall rather than endure the pomp of Renly's gatherings. He broke bread with the great Jon, Roose Bolton, who'd returned briefly from operations in the Riverlands, and a few other northern lords. The meal was plain: roasted fowl, root vegetables, and watery ale. But the mood was lighter than it had been in weeks. They spoke of the future, exchanging cautious hopes that the North might rebuild swiftly. Roose Bolton, pale eyes gleaming in the torchlight, quietly remarked, "The peace is welcome, to be sure. But I wonder if Renly's hold on the south is as secure as he believes. Stannis is not a man who yields easily." The great Jon snorted, gnawing on a leg of fowl. "Aye, but that's Renly's problem, not ours. Let the Baratheons squabble while we see to our own land. We gave enough blood fighting the Lannisters." That sentiment was echoed around the table. The men were tired of war, though if they had to fight again, they would. Robb sensed a mutual understanding. No matter how the realm churned with new conflicts, the North was determined to stand apart. He hoped it could stay that way. When the meal ended, Robb made his way outside. Grey Wind padded beside him, ears pricked. The dire wolf had grown restless in the cramped corridors of the Red Keep, so Robb led him into a courtyard that overlooked the city walls. In the moonlight, the silhouettes of battered ramparts and scorched rooftops stood stark against the sky. A breeze blew from Blackwater Bay, carrying a briny smell. He thought of the days-long siege, the clang of steel, the screams, the rivers of blood in the streets. He wondered how many in the city still feared them as conquerors. Yet at least they had not burned it to the ground. The Lannisters had threatened wildfire, but Tyrion had apparently kept that horror at bay. Robb reached down, scratching Grey Wind's ear. The wolf pressed against him, a comforting weight. "It's nearly over," he whispered as if reminding himself. Just a few more days. He couldn't quite dismiss the unease tugging at him, the sense that some new disaster might lurk around the corner. But for now, he let the night's quiet envelop him. The next morning brought an announcement from Renly, a grand ceremony in the throne room to show the realm that House Baratheon held the Iron Throne, with the Tyrells as staunch supporters and the North as an allied kingdom. Robb found himself reluctant to participate in more pomp, but he recognized the necessity. Appearances mattered, especially in King's Landing. When the appointed hour came, Robb arrived in the cavernous throne room with Catelyn and Sansa by his side, both clad in modest but fine northern cloaks. Lords of the Reach and Stormlands filled the space, along with a scattering of merchants and lesser officials. At the far end, upon that jagged mass of melted swords known as the Iron Throne, sat Renly Baratheon, crowned in gold, wearing regal robes of deep green. Ser Loras stood near him, while Margaery Tyrell graced a smaller seat just beside the dais. Gold cloaks in new tabards flanked the hall, though these men were loyal to the new regime. The herald's voice boomed out formalities. Then, with a theatrical gesture, the herald beckoned Robb Stark forward. The hall echoed with hushed whispers. Most of these people had never seen a king in the North in the flesh. Robb walked calmly, shoulders squared, aware that Sansa and Catelyn stood behind him. Grey Wind was not present. The direwolf would have caused too much alarm in such a setting. Renly stood, his crown gleaming beneath the torches. "King Robb of House Stark," he said clearly, "it is my pleasure to once more affirm the friendship between our kingdoms. The Stormlands, the Reach, and all the southern lords gathered here look upon you as a trusted ally who did help free the realm from Joffrey's tyranny. My gratitude is boundless." Robb inclined his head. He would not kneel, but he offered respectful acknowledgement. "I stand as king in the North, but I'm pleased that we fought side by side to see justice done." A stirring of voices swept the hall, some men murmuring about how odd it was that two kings stood in peace. But no one openly protested. The banners of the Tyrell rose, the Baratheon stag, and the Stark dire wolf hung from the pillars. Renly reached for a scroll a scribe held, then read aloud a declaration that the North was recognized as an independent kingdom, allied but not subjugated, and that in times of great peril, the two realms would come together against common threats. Applause spread through the throne room, though a few stern-faced lords seemed uncertain. Robb saw little alternative for them to express defiance. Renly was victorious, and the Tyrell army was still encamped outside the city. As the applause died, Renly offered a final flourish. "Let this day be remembered as the dawn of a new era. The rightful ruler sits the Iron Throne, and the king in the North stands as his esteemed equal, separate but in fraternity. May the realm prosper." With that, the ceremony concluded. Robb inclined his head once more, then turned to stride back through the hall. Catelyn and Sansa followed, but not before Sansa risked a glance around. She caught sight of Margaery Tyrell offering a supportive smile as if to say farewell. Sansa, in turn, nodded shyly. They returned to their quarters, where northern lords awaited them with stoic approval. The great Jon even clapped Robb on the shoulder in hearty congratulation. "You handled yourself well before the peacocking crowd," he boomed. "Now can we go home?" "Soon," Robb said, unable to hide a faint smile. That afternoon, word came from the city gates that more travelers had arrived seeking audience. Most were merchants or envoys from lesser houses, jostling to curry favor with the new king. But one group stood out, 3 knights bearing the sigil of House Florent, close kin to Stannis Baratheon's wife. They requested a meeting at once, citing urgent news from the Stormlands. Renly's courtiers scrambled, uncertain whether these Florent knights were friend or foe. Before nightfall, they were granted an audience in a side chamber with Renly, Margaery, and a few close advisors present. Robb, preparing for departure, had not planned to attend. However, as the alliance partner, he was quietly invited, and a messenger came to fetch him. He arrived to find Renly seated behind a polished table, Margaery at his side, her expression composed. Ser Loras hovered behind them, hand resting on his sword pommel. The Florent knights bowed, then delivered their tidings. Stannis Baratheon had indeed gathered a fleet and was said to be receiving counsel from a mysterious red priestess. Rumors circulated that a strange, shadowy magic clung to his camp. Some whispered that he had cast aside the faith of the Seven for a foreign fire god. Above all, it was clear that Stannis would not yield to Renly's claim. He considered it an affront to his birthright. A troubled look crossed Renly's face. "He means to fight me, then?" "He does, your grace," the lead knight said. "He gathers men from the Stormlands who still see him as the elder brother. And rumor says he has ships from Lys and Pentos, though that might be exaggeration." Renly's jaw tightened. Very well. The capital stands secure for now, and we shall not fear any illusions of magic or foreign gods. My brother chooses the path of conflict, so be it. The knights bowed once more, expressing a desire to remain loyal to Renly if it meant avoiding the ascetic sternness of Stannis' new faith. They spoke scornfully of the Red Priestess, Melisandre, rumored to be. Robb, listening in silence, could sense Renly's frustration. The newly minted king had hoped to unify the realm swiftly, yet he now faced rebellion from his own blood. When the knights departed, Renly turned to Robb. Forgive me for involving you further. You are free of these entanglements, but I would hear your counsel. Robb shrugged lightly. My father respected Stannis as a just man, but that was before all of this. I can't speak to what strange powers he might claim now. As for your war with him, I made a pledge not to meddle unless the Lannisters threatened. My men will not fight against Stannis unless he invades the north. Renly's expression betrayed no surprise. I understand. I do not ask you to fight my battles. Still, if Stannis grows too strong, it might imperil us all. Robb said nothing further, only offered a nod. Secretly, he was grateful that the North would not be dragged into another war. He had to focus on rebuilding, searching for Arya, and caring for his people. Renly would have to handle his brother alone or with the Tyrell's help. No doubt the Tyrell army, large and well-provisioned, might meet Stannis at any number of fields before he reached the capital. That night, as a courtesy, Renly hosted a smaller banquet for the departing northern lords. Musicians played soft tunes. Some of the tension from the day's news lingered, but Renly did his best to keep the atmosphere convivial. Robb sat near his mother and sister, speaking politely with Marjorie at intervals. He kept an eye on Sansa, who sipped watered wine and answered questions in a voice barely above a whisper. At least no one pestered her about Joffrey. Later, as the hour grew late, Renly clapped Robb on the shoulder. Before you go, King Robb, I must congratulate you again on your swift victories. Should you ever wish to return south as a friend, my gates stand open. Robb managed a polite smile. Thank you, Your Grace. May the gods see your reign be peaceful. He believed his words only partially. Peace was hardly guaranteed. But the courtesy mattered. The next morning dawned with a haze over the city. Trumpets sounded from the courtyard as the northern host assembled. Wagons of supplies, lines of mounted men-at-arms, and the solemn banners of the direwolf formed a procession. Catelyn, Sansa, and the other highborn ladies of the north would ride in carriages or on horseback, flanked by guards who'd sworn to protect them. Robb greeted each of his bannermen in turn, ensuring all was in order. The Great John, typically boisterous, actually looked eager to leave, speaking of the air in the city as thick and unpleasant. Roose Bolton was more reserved, but even he made a rare remark about longing for the cool breezes of the Dreadfort. Only a small retinue, perhaps a dozen men, would remain behind, mostly to monitor trade agreements and handle official communications. Renly appeared for the formal farewell, accompanied by Marjorie and a modest guard. The lords of the Stormlands and the Reach offered cordial partings, though the undertone was clear. The moment the North departed, the delicate balance in King's Landing would shift once more, and all eyes would turn toward Stannis. For a moment, Robb almost pitied Renly. He had inherited a throne rife with complications. But pity did not change his own priority: returning home. Amid the sound of hooves on cobblestone and the rumble of cart wheels, the gates of the Red Keep opened wide. The city streets were calmer than during their entry, but a crowd gathered nonetheless to watch the Northerners depart. Some faces bore curiosity, others relief. Here and there, a cheer went up, for despite everything, many believed the new regime had ended the Lannisters' tyranny. Catelyn rode in a carriage near the front, Sansa beside her. Sansa kept her eyes forward, head high, refusing to let the stairs unnerve her. Robb rode just behind them on a tall destrier, flanked by the Great John and a handful of knights. Grey wind bounded along the edge of the column, occasionally drawing gasps from the onlookers. Robb caught sight of Tyrion Lannister standing atop a balcony in one of the keep's towers, peering down with a pensive expression. How that particular Lannister would fare in Renly's court was anyone's guess. But for now, it was no longer Robb's concern. They passed through the city gates, out onto the King's Road that stretched northward, an old, familiar route. Even though the scars of battle still marked the fields beyond the walls, a breeze carried a fresher scent than the smoky gloom of King's Landing. Robb felt an uncoiling of tension in his chest. Each clop of hooves carried them closer to the Riverlands, to Riverrun, and eventually to the north. On the third day of travel, the column navigated along a portion of the King's Road flanked by farmland. The devastation wrought by Lannister foragers was evident. Scorched barns, shattered fences. Catelyn gazed on the ruin with grim sorrow, recalling how these lands had once been bountiful. Robb vowed silently that if the Alliance's grain shipments arrived in time, at least the people might plant again next season. The small folk had endured far too much under the Lannisters' rampage. In the evenings, they made camp by rivers or on hillsides, always posting sentries. Though the threat from Tywin Lannister had receded, brigands and desperate mercenaries sometimes roamed. The first week passed with little incident. Sansa often kept to herself, though Catelyn gently encouraged her to join the campfires. Now and then, the men would tell stories, or the Great John would bellow half a bawdy song, prompting Sansa to blush. Despite the awkwardness, there were moments of genuine camaraderie that reminded Robb of simpler days. On the 10th day, scouts returned with word. A small Lannister host roamed near an abandoned village, perhaps no more than 300 men, harassing local farmers. Robb conferred with his bannermen, deciding that they could not ignore it. The Lannister stragglers were rumored to be led by a minor cousin of Tywin's, making trouble out of spite. "We'll handle them," Robb said. "We can't let them reform into a bigger threat, and we owe it to these lands to rid them of brigands." Thus, a detachment of northern cavalry rode out at dusk, guided by local scouts. Robb led them personally, though Catelyn expressed concern, reminding him that many more men depended on his leadership. He assured her he would be careful. The Great John accompanied him, as did a few hundred mounted men. Sansa and the main camp stayed behind, guarded by Bolton's men and other stalwarts. Grey Wind padded along, nose to the ground, as if smelling the blood that might soon be spilled. They found the Lannister group holed up in a dilapidated manor house, its fields burned to stubble. A few tents surrounded the courtyard. When the northern cavalry thundered closer, a sentry shouted alarm. Robb's men fanned out, crossbowmen at the ready. He gave them a chance to surrender, calling out in a strong voice that the war was effectively over. But the Lannister men, hungry for revenge or simply following their misguided lord, loosed arrows in response. In the dim moonlight, the battle was brief and brutal. The northern cavalry charged, scattering the disorganized defenders. Crossbow bolts hissed, swords clashed, men screamed. Robb found himself face to face with a minor Lannister bannerman, an older man with lines of desperation etched into his face. Robb parried the man's frantic blow, then disarmed him. Grey Wind barreled into another pair of Lannister men, sending them sprawling in terror. The Great John, bellowing like a bear, led a wedge of riders who broke the final line of resistance. When the dust settled, the Lannister group lay defeated. The handful of survivors, maybe 24, dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, begging for mercy. Robb's men took them prisoner, though some northern soldiers cried out for their blood, remembering horrors inflicted by Tywin's armies on the Riverlands. Robb forced them to stand down. These captives would be brought to Riverrun and judged by Edmure Tully. The battered manor house fell silent. Shreds of a lion banner flapped in the night breeze. In the aftermath, Robb walked among the fallen, the stench of death and sweat thick in the air. A heaviness filled him. Once again, men had died for a lost cause. The clangor of steel still rang in his ears. Grey Wind padded near, muzzle dark with blood. Robb reached down, letting the direwolf sniff his hand, trying to steady himself. The Great John approached, wiping gore from his sword. "Well struck, your grace. They never stood a chance." He spat on the ground. "That's the last of 'em around these parts, I reckon." Robb nodded, expression grim. "Let's hope so. We return to camp by dawn. I want no further skirmishes." They rode back through the night, leading the prisoners bound behind them. The men were silent, exhausted from the clash. The Great John occasionally hummed a victory tune, but most displayed little cheer. This was no grand victory, just another sad footnote in a war that refused to die quickly. At daybreak, they reached the main column. Catelyn and Sansa stood near the front, worry etched on their faces. Relief washed over them when they saw Robb unharmed, though the dried blood on some of the Northmen's armor told a grim story. Sansa asked no questions, simply letting out a shaky breath. Catelyn pressed her lips together and gave a curt nod of understanding. She knew how these things went. So they continued on day by day until the walls of Riverrun rose on the horizon, a welcome sight. Edmure Tully, acting lord of the castle, came out to greet them with a wary smile. The banners of House Tully, trout on a field of red and blue, flapped from the battlements. The Riverlands, though ravaged, still stood. Within hours, horns sounded and the gates opened to admit Robb's host. Edmure embraced Catelyn as soon as she dismounted. Then his eyes landed on Sansa and he offered a gentle, uncle-like hug. "Gods, you're safe. I was worried." The rumors out of King's Landing, he trailed off, not wanting to dredge up her captivity. Sansa only managed a faint smile, her gaze drifting over the Bailey's familiar corners. "Thank you, uncle. It's good to see a friendly face." Edmure clapped Robb on the back. "Nephew, you've done well by us. I hear you struck an alliance with Renly." Robb nodded, leading them inside. "We did. The North stands independent, but we have trade and mutual defense. There'll be shipments of grain courtesy of the Tyrells." "That's welcome news," Edmure said, eyes brightening. "We can distribute it to the villages that were burned. We've had to ration our stores." They sat in Riverrun's great hall, sharing the story of King's Landing's fall and the subsequent pact. Edmure recounted how Roose Bolton had recently scored a victory at the fords against Tywin's main force, pushing the Lannisters west. The Riverlords were still on alert for raids, but for the moment, the tide had turned. The castle hummed with efforts to rebuild. Smiths hammered out new plowshares and scythes. Surviving smallfolk trickled back to farmland, hoping for better days. It was a fragile recovery, but a recovery nonetheless. "Will you stay here long?" Edmure asked Robb over supper that evening. They dined at the high table, joined by Catelyn, Sansa, and several Riverland lords. "Only a short while," Robb replied. "We rest, resupply, then head north. Winterfell waits. My brothers Bran and Rickon must be worried. And we must see if there's any sign of Arya." Edmure nodded. "If we learn anything about Arya's whereabouts, we'll send word by Raven at once. The Riverlands have eyes and ears on every road. One day we might find a traveler who's seen her." Sansa went quiet at that. Robb squeezed her hand beneath the table, hoping to offer silent reassurance. The talk turned to other matters: how to distribute the promised southern grain, how to rebuild the ravaged hamlets along the Red Fork. The conversation was sobering, but at least it concerned forging life out of ruin, not inflicting further harm. That night, in a small chamber offered for his rest, Robb tossed on a straw-stuffed mattress, mind roiling. He pictured Arya in some hidden corner of Westeros, disguised or alone, maybe forging an identity to survive. He pictured Stannis raising a fiery banner, Tywin glowering from the west, Renly wearing his golden crown, and the Tyrells whispering in the shadows. Too many threats still loomed for him to feel wholly at ease. Yet he sensed the flicker of hope. For the first time since Ned Stark's execution, the North and its allies held an advantage, and the combined weight of Lannister power had been checked. Maybe, just maybe, they could carve out a future that honored the memory of his father. They remained at Riverrun for 3 days. Sansa spent time with her mother by the hearth, reading or mending clothes, while outside, the courtyard rang with the clamor of men reshoeing horses and fletching arrows. The great Jon boasted of his exploits in the war, entertaining any who would listen. Roose Bolton, typically distant, spent the days conferring with Edmure on the best deployment of men to guard the region's roads. Robb supervised the final details of supply, ensuring they had enough provisions for the march home. At sunrise on the 4th day, they set out from Riverrun, heading north at last. It felt like a homecoming begun, though they still had leagues to travel. The banners of House Stark and House Tully flew side by side on the roads, drawing respectful nods from villagers who recognized the victors of the recent war. Some knelt or shouted thanks. Others merely watched in silence. The further north they went, the sparser the population became. The land turned rugged and cooler. Robb found himself breathing more freely. The crisp air reminded him of the snows to come. They passed the ruins of villages burned in the early days of the conflict. Robb swallowed hard each time he saw blackened timbers, thinking of how the Lannisters had tried to break the Riverlands. Yet life persisted. Grass grew again where wagons had once rutted the earth, and bits of farmland re-emerged from the ashes. The sight gave him a small sense of relief. War could destroy, but not forever. People always found a way to rebuild, as the North had countless times. Eventually, They reached the neck of land near the twins, where House Fry held sway. Memories of Walder Frey's cunning conditions on safe passage flickered through Robb's mind. But they had parted ways on better terms after the success at Whispering Wood. Now the Freys, though still as prickly as old brambles, were unlikely to cause trouble with the victorious Northern King. Robb's party approached the twins with caution, yet a Fry herald came out promptly, offering passage. They exchanged polite words, paid a token toll, and crossed the wide, cold rivers on the Great Bridge. Sansa gazed down from the crossing, uneasy at the swirling currents below. Catelyn kept a tight hold on her daughter's arm. Walder Frey did not appear, sending a grandson instead with some vague excuse. Robb didn't complain. The less time wasted here, the better. So they pressed on, leaving the Riverlands behind. As the landscape shifted into the boggy terrain of the neck, many men pulled their cloaks tighter. The air grew damp, the road narrower. Rickety watchtowers rose from the mist, belonging to the Crannogmen loyal to House Reed. Robb felt a renewed sense of belonging in these rough lands. He was crossing into the true north, the homeland of his ancestors. When they reached Moat Cailin, those ancient ruins that guarded the causeway, the Watchers recognized Stark banners and ushered them through. They paused only long enough to rest the horses and send ravens ahead to Winterfell, announcing their imminent return. Robb penned a brief note to Bran and Rickon, telling them Sansa was safe, that he was bringing her home, and that he hoped to find Arya. He tried to make the note sound confident, though inside he still wrestled with the pang of not knowing. Another week of hard riding brought them finally onto the open plains of the north. The air grew colder, the sky more immense, the forests deeper. Sansa began to relax by degrees, as if each mile put more distance between her and the Red Keep's horrors. Catelyn rode close by Robb's side, a pensive look on her face. Perhaps she recalled how she first journeyed north as a bride to Ned Stark, uncertain of what awaited her. At last, the looming walls of Winterfell appeared on the horizon, rising from the trees. The castle seemed smaller than Robb remembered. He had been gone so long, fighting battles and making alliances. Yet warmth filled his chest at the sight. Smoke curled from the kitchens, the ancient towers stood proud, and the flicker of torches lit the ramparts. The gates opened at their approach, and a flurry of activity greeted them, stable hands, guards, and townsfolk who recognized their king returning at last. Robb dismounted near the gates. Grey wind darted ahead, tail high, as though he, too, recognized home. From across the courtyard came two smaller figures. Bran, taller than when Robb had left, but still a child, sat astride a sturdy horse, guided by Hodder, the gentle giant. Rickon rushed forward on foot, his face alight with excitement, though he'd grown a bit taller, too. Summer and Shaggy Dog, their own dire wolves, bounded behind them, weaving between the stable hands with curious sniffs. "Robb!" Rickon cried, his voice echoing across the yard. The boy sprinted into Robb's arms. Robb hugged his little brother fiercely, heart surging with emotion. "Is that Sansa?" Rickon asked, wide-eyed as he glimpsed her stepping down from the carriage. "Sansa, you're home." Bran urged his horse closer, Hodder steadying the reins. The boy's face bore a solemn wisdom that had not been there before. He managed a tight smile. "We heard rumors you'd won the war." He glanced at Catelyn and Sansa, relief clear in his eyes. "It's good to see you all." Sansa bent to hug Rickon, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You're so big," she murmured, smoothing back his hair. "I missed you, Rickon." Then she turned to Bran, her voice catching. "Bran, oh Bran, I'm sorry I was gone so long." Bran reached out and they clasped hands, the moment heavy with unspoken grief. They all felt Ned's absence like a cold wind, but at least now they had each other. Catelyn hovered, eyes bright with tears as she embraced her younger sons. Robb took a deep breath, gazing around the courtyard. Men busied themselves unloading supplies while the banners snapped overhead. Somewhere in the distance, the hot springs steamed. He could almost feel the heartbeat of Winterfell beneath his feet, warm and steady, a part of him. By evening, the Starks gathered in the great hall for a quiet family meal, joined by a handful of loyal bannermen and castle staff. The atmosphere was subdued but full of relief, a sense of arrival and safety. Serving maids brought out roast venison, fresh bread, and turnips with butter. Even with the war still looming elsewhere, tonight they feasted on a small slice of homecoming. The direwolves lounged around the hall's perimeter, content to be near their humans. Bran explained how he tried to keep the castle in order with Maester Luwin's help. Rickon chimed in with childish enthusiasm about the time he'd chased crows around the yard or how Shaggy Dog got lost in the crypts. Robb listened, smiling gently, while Sansa and Catelyn sat close, taking it all in. This was what they had yearned for, a taste of normalcy. Of course, the shadow of Ned's absence hung over them. His seat was empty. His voice was missing, but the family drew closer in that emptiness, forging a quiet strength in their bond. Later, Robb and Catelyn spoke with Maester Luwin by the dim glow of candlelight. The old maester brought out ledgers, letters, and accounts detailing the state of the castle's stores. They had enough provisions for a strong winter, Luwin said, especially with the trade deal from the south. There were repairs to be made on the walls and towers, but nothing that couldn't be managed. If they had peace, truly, then Winterfell would flourish. When talk turned to Arya, Maester Luwin sighed. No word has reached us. All ravens from King's Landing carried only rumors that she escaped after Lord Eddard's execution. We can hope she made her way through the Riverlands unnoticed. But the roads are perilous. Catelyn's voice trembled slightly. We'll keep hoping and searching. Perhaps news will come from travelers or from the scouts we sent forth. Robb swallowed hard, recalling how Sansa wept when they told her Arya still hadn't been found. He rubbed at his temple, feeling weariness drape him like a cloak. We'll send out fresh riders, see if any new leads surface. She could be anywhere, or she might have changed her name to hide from the Lannisters. A resourceful girl, Luwin agreed softly. If she's alive, the gods willing, we will find her in time. Thus, the days at Winterfell passed in a haze of partial relief and lingering sorrow. The castle began to buzz with renewed life as men returned from the war, battered but determined to defend their homeland. Robb took to his duties as king in the north seriously. He held court in the Great Hall, hearing petitions from petty lords who'd lost livestock or land in the chaos of war, passing fair judgments that sometimes recalled Ned's sense of justice. He met with any traveling merchant or messenger who might have scraps of news about the realm. Word trickled in that Renly Baratheon had secured King's Landing firmly while Stannis' forces gathered near Storm's End. Tywin Lannister remained in the west, licking his wounds. There was talk of Euron Greyjoy newly claiming the Seastone chair, yet it was uncertain what the Ironborn might do. As the sun set each evening, Robb walked the battlements with Grey Wind at his side. The cold wind of the north stung his cheeks, but he reveled in it. Far below, the rolling forests faded into twilight, the looming shape of the Wolfswood beckoning. Sometimes he ventured to the Godwood, kneeling before the heart tree with its carved weirwood face, hoping for some whisper of the old gods that might guide him. If his father's spirit dwelled anywhere, surely it would be there among the ancient roots. Yet the face only watched in silence. Catelyn noticed his brooding. One evening, she approached him under the reddening sky. "Robb," she said softly, "the war might not be over, but you have given the North a chance for peace. Your father would have wanted that." He gazed at the setting sun. "I know, and I'm trying to honor his memory. It's just, I fear what might come next. If Stannis defeats Renly, or if the Lannisters rebound, we'll be drawn into more bloodshed. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," she said gently. "For now, we strengthen our lands and care for our people." He turned to her, letting out a slow breath. She was right, of course. Dwelling on distant threats solved nothing. "I'll see to it that our men fortify Moat Cailin," he said. "If an army tries to march on us, they'll find the neck well defended." Catelyn nodded, approval in her eyes. They were forging a future from the ashes of war. That itself was a victory. Days folded into weeks. Winterfell bustled like it had not in years. The blacksmith's forge glowed late into the night, shaping new blades and repairing old ones. The library tower hosted fresh scrolls from traveling scholars. Sansa tried to refamiliarize herself with the corridors and courtyards, sometimes pausing to stare at the places where she once played with Arya. Rickon and Bran resumed old routines, though Bran's injury kept him mostly to horseback or Hodder's arms. Robb presided over it all, a king in name yet still feeling like the boy who used to train with a wooden sword in the yard. One crisp morning, as the first hints of frost kissed the ground, a raven arrived bearing the sigil of House Baratheon, Renly's seal. Robb read the letter, brow knitting. Renly reported that Stannis had attacked Storm's End with surprising ferocity, bolstered by strange new allies. However, the Tyrell host had marched to meet him, and the two Baratheon brothers were locked in a stalemate. Rumors of shadowy assassinations and mysterious fires circulated. Renly urged Robb to consider sending a token force to assist him in finishing the fight, citing the alliance they had formed. In exchange, Renly promised even greater southern trade and the possibility of capturing valuable eastern shipping routes. It was all very tempting on parchment, but Robb's gut churned at the prospect. He summoned his bannermen, the Great John, Roose Bolton, Lady Mormont, and others who had come north. Seated at the high table in Winterfell's hall, they discussed the letter. Great John pounded a fist, spouting, "No more southern wars. We spilt enough blood already." Bolton, his expression cool, noted that an idle alliance could be undone if they refused to help. Lady Mormont spoke of the Bear Island garrisons, pointing out that they'd be vulnerable if the alliance collapsed and House Tyrell turned against them. Yet none of them were eager to see more northern men die on foreign fields. Robb listened, torn. Finally, he said, "We are not oathbreakers. But the letter of our alliance was clear: we fight only if the Lannisters threaten or if the North is in jeopardy. This is a quarrel between the Baratheon brothers. Let Renly and Stannis resolve it." The council murmured agreement. So Robb penned a reply, politely declining to intervene but reiterating that the alliance stood if the Lannisters attacked. He sealed it with the direwolf stamp, sending it south via Raven. The next day he went to the Godwood, wrestling with the choice he had made. Yet every instinct told him it was the right call. The North had no business shedding blood in Baratheon disputes. When the Raven returned weeks later, Renly's tone was subdued. Stannis had struck a blow at Storm's End, but House Tyrell forced him to retreat to Dragonstone. For now, the city of King's Landing was safe and Renly's rule remained. He expressed disappointment at the North's refusal to assist but did not condemn them outright. It seemed the alliance would hold, albeit more thinly. Robb felt relief that Renly had not declared them traitors or demanded they ride south. Let the Southerners solve their own battles. Time flowed steadily at Winterfell, each day bringing crisp winds that heralded the approach of true winter. Scouts patrolled the borders of the Neck, reporting little activity from the south. Catelyn took charge of the household, seeing that each storehouse was prepared for colder months. Bran immersed himself in the study of old legends, occasionally sharing them with Rickon. Sansa helped the steward catalog shipments of grain from the Reach. Now and then, a few battered refugees from the war drifted north, seeking the safety of Starklands. Robb welcomed them, offering farmland if they pledged loyalty and peace. Yet the quiet days were marred by the constant awareness that beyond their borders, conflict simmered. Reports trickled in that Tywin Lannister had formed a new alliance with some lesser houses, regaining partial strength. The Ironborn were restive, perhaps eyeing the northern coast, and Stannis hovered at Dragonstone, nursing resentment against Renly's reign. The realm was a cauldron waiting to boil over again. During one chilling sunset, as Robb wandered the battlements, gray wind at his side, Sansa approached. She wore a heavy cloak of wolf fur, the hood drawn up. She looked hesitant but determined, features lit by the dying light. "Robb," she said softly, "may I join you?" "Of course." He gestured for her to walk alongside him, and they paced the wall's length, gazing out at the leafless trees and the distant plumes of smoke from Winterfell's chimneys. Sansa gathered her courage. "I've been thinking. I know we can't do much to find Arya by waiting here, but maybe I could help. We have connections with lords who travel to and from the south. We could offer bigger rewards or send more people to search." Robb regarded her solemnly. "We are doing that in part. But if you have ideas, I'm willing to listen." Her eyes flickered. "In King's Landing, I often overheard courtiers talk about the network of merchants and sailors, those who carry word from port to port. If we sent envoys to White Harbor, we could spread the search among the merchant ships that travel the narrow sea. If Arya got on a ship somehow." He touched her arm gently. "That's a thought, Sansa. I'll speak with Wyman Manderley at White Harbor. We'll spread the word more widely, offer a handsome reward for any true lead on Arya Stark." Sansa nodded, face brightening slightly. "Thank you, Robb." She hesitated. I can't bear the thought of doing nothing. I spent too long feeling helpless in King's Landing." He squeezed her arm in a reassuring gesture. "You're not helpless anymore. You're home." She smiled, and for the first time in a while, it reached her eyes. They walked a bit further in silence. Then Sansa asked quietly, "Do you ever think of Father when you're here?" His chest tightened. "Every moment. I see him in the courtyard, training us with wooden swords. I hear him in the God's Wood, telling me to listen to the quiet. I wish he were here." Sansa blinked back tears. "I wish that too." They stood together, gazing across the dusk-shrouded land. The howling of wolves echoed from somewhere in the distance, both eerie and comforting. In that wild refrain, Robb felt a stirring of purpose. They would endure as House Stark always had. They would protect their own, stand for justice, and meet whatever new storms blew in from the south or the sea. For now, at least, the North was at peace, and the memory of Ned Stark guided them like a lantern in the night. Seasons began their subtle turn. The days shortened, the nights grew biting cold. Snow fell early that year, dusting Winterfell's walls with white. Small wonder that southern lords feared the northern winters so fiercely. The approach of winter changed everything. Yet inside the castle's ancient walls, Hot springs and thick stone kept them warm. Robb's court adapted to the cycle of northern life, storing extra provisions, hosting harvest feasts in the early snows. A handful of new messages arrived, bringing glimpses of the realm's ongoing drama. One from Renly said he had forced a final withdrawal of Stannis' forces from the mainland. Another from the west suggested Tywin Lannister was entrenching at Casterly Rock, focusing on diplomacy with uncertain success. None of it required direct northern involvement, and Robb was content to let the Southerners wrestle with their fate. Gradually, the horrors of war receded, replaced by the daily responsibilities of ruling. Robb found an odd satisfaction in it, resolving disputes between lesser lords, organizing the distribution of goods, ensuring roads were safe from bandits. It gave him a sense of purpose beyond battle. Sansa, likewise, took on a role helping the stewards with their records, showing a knack for managing letters and finances. She still wore a haunted look at times, but her gentle smiles became more frequent. Catelyn oversaw the broader administration, counseling Robb with the wisdom of her years. She never forgot her southern upbringing, but she embraced the North fully, drawing respect from the Bannermen. Bran continued to explore the spiritual side of life, spending hours in the Godswood or reading about the children of the forest. Rickon, still young, chased the direwolves through the courtyard, ignoring the cold. The household bustled with their presence, even in the creeping frost. Maester Luwin guided them all with patient advice, and the blacksmith Mikken hammered away at new iron gates for the winter storerooms. And so the months wore on, each day forging a sense of routine. It was not the routine they had known before Ned's death. Too much had changed for that. But a new equilibrium, shaped by the memory of war and the hard-won independence of the North. Robb found that each dawn felt less oppressive than the last, less overshadowed by the ghosts of battles fought far away. One late afternoon, just as the sun dipped behind the white-coated trees, a small party of travelers arrived at Winterfell's gates. They carried no obvious banners, but the guards noted they wore battered armor under plain cloaks. Curiosity spread through the courtyard as they petitioned entry, claiming they brought important tidings for the king in the north. Suspicion flared raiders or spies could mask themselves as travelers, but the guard at the gate swore they glimpsed the crest of a wolf on one rider's belt, so they were allowed in under heavy guard. Robb, alerted to their presence, met them in the Great Hall, flanked by a few trusted lords. Sansa and Catelyn watched from the dais, each with a measure of caution in their eyes. The travelers removed their hoods, revealing a mix of grim faces, men in their prime, one older woman with hawk-like eyes, a younger man with a braided scalp. They knelt before Robb, then rose quickly, exchanging nervous glances. "Your Grace," began the eldest man, who wore a half-rusted breastplate. He spoke with a northern accent. "We served under Lord Bolton in the Riverlands, but after the fighting died down, we took to searching for a lost soul. One of our number heard rumor of a girl wearing Stark colors traveling with a group of outlaws. We can't swear it was Arya Stark, but the rumors." At once, a hush fell across the hall. Sansa's eyes snapped wide, and Catelyn's hand flew to her chest. Robb leaned forward, heart pounding. "Speak." The man cleared his throat. "They say she was seen near the God's Eye in the company of men calling themselves the Brotherhood without banners. A group of outlaws that fights for small folk and roams the Riverlands. We caught a fleeting glimpse, but we weren't sure it was her. The girl had short hair and wore ragged clothes, but someone heard her say the name Arya. Then they vanished. Excitement and fear warred within. Robb." He struggled to keep his voice steady. "When was this?" 2 moons ago, give or take. We tried to follow, but they moved like ghosts. The word we gathered is that they sometimes head north in winter to hide in the hills. We only arrived here now because we had to avoid Lannister patrols. We came to bring you what news we could in hopes that if it was her, Sansa gasped, half rising from her seat. Catelyn's eyes shimmered with tears. Robb's pulse raced. If Arya was alive, traveling with these outlaws, there might be a chance to find her. He forced himself to remain calm. "You did well. If this leads to my sister, your reward will be generous. Have you told anyone else of this?" They all shook their heads. The older woman, voice gruff, said, "We wanted to bring it straight to you. The Lannisters put a price on any Stark girl not under their thumb, so we stayed quiet." Robb nodded firmly. "You have our thanks. Stay here as guests for as long as you like. We'll speak more and I'll decide the next steps." The travelers bowed, relief plain on their faces. Guards led them away to warm lodgings. The moment they were gone, Sansa spoke in a hushed tone. Arya, near the God's Eye. That's in the Riverlands, close to where so many battles were fought. Catelyn's shoulders trembled slightly. The Brotherhood without banners. I recall tales of them. They were formed after Lord Beric Dondarrion was sent by Robert Baratheon to deal with outlaws. Some say they turned outlaw themselves, but they championed the small folk. Robb exhaled, mind whirling with possibilities. We can't be certain it's Arya, but it's the first solid rumor in an age. We must send word to Edmure at Riverrun, have him dispatch men to search discreetly. And perhaps I should go myself or send a trusted party. A hush fell as he weighed the dangers. The Riverlands were calmer now, but not entirely safe. Winter pressed upon them, complicating travel. Yet how could he ignore this lead? Catelyn's voice was uneven but resolute. We can't let this slip away. I'll go. I know the Riverlands and I can speak with Edmure directly. But Robb cut her off gently. Mother, your place is here. You've done enough traveling through war-torn lands. Let me assemble a small contingent of picked men. The Great John, perhaps, or another who can handle the rigors of the search. Let me go, Sansa said suddenly, surprising them all. She drew in a shaky breath. Arya and we were never close, but maybe if she saw me, she'd trust us. She might think it's some trick otherwise. Robb shook his head. You only just escaped King's Landing. I won't risk your safety. Sansa's jaw trembled, but she pressed on. I know the Riverlands too. I was there when Father was named Hand. And I need to help. I can't just stay safe in Winterfell while Arya is out there. A tense silence followed. Catelyn looked torn between pride and worry. Robb fixed Sansa with a firm stare. It's dangerous. The country is still crawling with outlaws of all stripes. Lannister remnants, who knows what else. She met his gaze, eyes bright with determination. I survived Joffrey. I'm not the girl who was betrothed to him anymore. The words carried weight. Robb glanced at Catelyn, who hesitated, her face anguished. Then she spoke softly. If Sansa is determined, she might be right about Arya trusting her more than some random soldier. But I insist that she travels with an escort we can trust. Seasoned knights, loyal to House Stark. Robb ran a hand through his hair, torn. Then I'll lead the party myself. I won't let you go alone. Sansa's eyes widened. But you're the king in the north. Winterfell needs you. The north can spare me for a while if there's a chance to bring Arya home, Robb declared firmly. You, me, and a band of well-chosen men. Mother, Bran, and Rickon can manage here with Maester Luwin's help. I won't trust anyone else to this mission. Catelyn inhaled slowly, tears threatening to surface. Then so be it. Bring my little girl home. The hours that followed were frantic with preparation. Letters were hastily sent to the River Lords, instructing them to keep an ear out for the Brotherhood without banners. Supplies were packed for a winter journey. Robb chose 15 men for the search, a mix of knights and scouts experienced in the terrain, including the Great John, who roared that he'd be damned if he let the king in the north chase rumors without him. Sansa insisted on preparing her own gear, determined not to seem the pampered lady she had once been. She donned sturdier clothes, a cloak trimmed with fur, and a short sword belted at her hip, though she had limited skill with it. Robb ordered a set of chainmail made to fit her slender frame. They set out at dawn, leaving Winterfell under a swirl of snow. Gray wind bounded alongside Robb's horse, while Sansa rode carefully at his side. The Great John, boisterous as ever, led the men, who each wore stark colors or plain cloaks. The air crackled with cold, but their hearts were fired with hope. They rode south across the leagues they had just traveled, though now with a different purpose. The thought that Arya might be waiting at the end of this path, ragged but alive, spurred them onward. Catelyn stood on the walls, Bran and Rickon flanking her, as they watched the search party dwindle in the distance. The wind carried her whispered plea. Bring her back! Riding day and night, braving the chill winds and the pockets of drifting snow, they made for Moat Cailin, then pressed into the sodden neck. The Greatjon's booming laughter occasionally broke the silence, but mostly the group conserved energy. Sansa held her cloak tight, focusing on the possibility of reuniting with her lost sister. Each evening, Robb watched her carefully, remembering how quickly the southern climate had weighed on her before. But she pushed forward, setting her jaw, refusing to complain. After crossing into the Riverlands, they encountered scattered refugees on the roads. Some recognized Robb's banners and called out blessings for the king in the north. Others shrank away, fearful of armed men. At each chance, they asked about the Brotherhood without banners, describing a girl who might be Arya. Most had heard only rumors, a group that vanished into the deep woods after robbing Lannister foragers or freeing captives from a local lord. A few said they traveled near the God's Eye Lake, near Harrenhal's dreaded silhouette. The Greyjohn spat at the mention of Harrenhal, recalling the cruelty that had taken place there. Their search led them from one hamlet to the next, each half-ruined or clinging to meager survival. They learned that the outlaws sometimes gave food to the hungry, leaving as quickly as they came. No one could say for certain if a girl named Arya traveled with them. Still, the rumor persisted, fueling Robb's determination. Sansa grew quieter the further they went, her eyes reflecting the suffering around them. The Riverlands had seen so many atrocities. If Arya had wandered through these ravaged fields, how had she survived? One twilight, the party came upon the smoldering remains of a small inn. It had clearly been burned down days earlier, whether by bandits or vengeful soldiers was unclear. Among the ash and charred beams, they found a single survivor, a young boy with singed hair huddled behind a broken trough. Sansa dismounted at once, kneeling beside him, ignoring her own discomfort in the cold mud. "What happened?" she asked softly, pressing a water skin to his lips. The boy flinched, eyes wide, but he gulped greedily. Robb and the others approached. The boy's voice rasped. "They wore the lion, said we gave bread to traitors. They burned us out." "My mother, father," tears streaked his face. Sansa's own eyes glistened. "We're sorry. We're here to help. We're looking for a group that helps small folk too, a brotherhood. Did you see them?" The boy coughed. "They came after. Gave me water. One of them was a girl with a blade. She looked fierce. She said her name was Aerie or something. Told me I'd live to find safety." Robb's heart pounded. Aerie was the alias Arya had used back in Winterfell at times, scurrying around to avoid septas. It was too close to be coincidence. Where did they go? The boy coughed again, pointing vaguely east. "Toward the woods near the lake. Said the Lannisters were close, they had to move on." Robb stood, eyes shining with renewed purpose. "Thank you," he said, pressing a few coins into the boy's trembling hand. "Try to find shelter in the next village, mention my name, and they'll help." Sansa nodded in agreement, gently squeezing the boy's shoulder before returning to her horse. Her face was set with determination. The Greyjohn let out a triumphant shout. "We're close then." They pressed on, deeper into the Riverlands, until the God's Eye Lake spread before them like a vast, mist-shrouded mirror. Harrenhal loomed to the west, an ominous silhouette against the gray sky. A chill wind rippled the water's surface. The roads here were half-flooded in places, the woods dense. It was the perfect place for outlaws to hide. The Greyjohn proposed splitting the party to cover more ground. Robb hesitated, wanting to keep Sansa close, but decided the risk was worth it. So they divided into 3 groups of 5, each with a horn to signal if they found anything. Sansa stayed with Robb and the Greyjohn. They followed a narrow track along the lake's edge, scanning the woods for signs of life. The air smelled of damp leaves and decay. Birds scattered at their approach, cawing in alarm. Occasionally, Robb glimpsed a shape in the distance, only to realize it was a lone deer or a trick of the light. As dusk fell, they set up camp near a mossy clearing. A ring of trees shielded them from the worst of the wind. Robb posted double sentries, conscious that they might be near Lannister scouts or brigands. Over a small fire, they warmed dried meat and drank ale from battered flasks. Sansa hunched by the flames, exhaustion evident. Robb rested a hand on her shoulder. "We'll find her," he said softly, though part of him wondered how many more days they could search. Sansa nodded. "We must." The Greyjohn kept watch, pacing around the perimeter. Grey winds sniffed at the undergrowth, occasionally growling low. The night seemed to close in, thick and mysterious. Eventually, Sansa drifted to a fitful sleep, wrapped in cloaks. Robb remained awake a while longer, lost in thought, uncertain if they were wandering blindly after a dream. Somewhere in the small hours, grey winds stiffened, ears pricked. A subtle rustling in the darkness. Robb rose, hand on his sword, heart pounding. The Greyjohn heard it too, quietly rallying the men. Moments later, a voice called from the shadows, "Halt. We mean no harm, but we have arrows trained on you." Robb tensed. In the dim flicker of the dying fire, he saw vague shapes shifting among the trees. "Who goes there?" he demanded, trying to sound calm. A figure stepped forward, a hooded man wearing patched leather. "We are the Brotherhood without banners. We know you, King in the North. We wonder what brings you to these parts." Relief crashed through Robb, tempered by caution. He lowered his sword slightly. "We seek my sister, Arya Stark. I heard she traveled with you." A pause. Then the man whistled softly. Shapes parted, and there, stepping forward with a blade in her hand, came a slight figure, her hair cropped short, eyes fierce in the firelight. She froze at the sight of Robb's face as though disbelieving. Her lips parted. "Robb," she whispered. There was a tremor in her voice, both hope and terror. His heart seemed to stop, joy surging so fast it hurt. "Arya," he breathed, lunging forward. She stumbled into his arms, letting out a ragged sob of disbelief. He clutched her tight, feeling how thin and wiry she was, how tense. But she was alive, she was real. "Arya, oh gods, we found you." She buried her face in his shoulder, tears hot against his neck. I thought I'd never see you again." Her voice cracked. Sansa startled awake at the sound, blinking groggily. When she realized what was happening, she flung herself forward. "Arya!" She crouched beside them, eyes brimming. Arya lifted her head, blinking through tears, the old tension between them momentarily forgotten. They clung to each other, Sansa murmuring apology after apology, Arya half laughing, half crying in relief. The Brotherhood men hovered, as if uncertain whether they had done right in bringing Arya forward. But seeing the Starks reunited, they relaxed. The Great Jon grinned broadly, tears shining in his own eyes. "By the gods," he rumbled. "The Wolf family is together again." Robb eventually pulled back to look at Arya, brushing her cropped hair aside. "We've been searching everywhere. Are you hurt?" She shook her head, eyes still streaming. "I got away after Father. They helped me. We fought Lannisters, hid in villages. I wanted to find you, but I didn't know where you were." Sansa reached to grip Arya's hand, trembling. "We're taking you home. To Winterfell." Arya swallowed, nodding. "Home," she repeated, voice raw. "Yes, please." The Brotherhood's hooded leader stepped forward, clearing his throat. "We are Beric Dondarrion's men," he explained quietly. "We found Arya after she escaped Harrenhal. She was a tough little wolf, helped us fight a few times. We meant to return her to her family if we could. Seems the gods saw fit to make it happen tonight." Robb nodded gratefully. "You have my thanks. If you ever need refuge in the north, you shall have it." The man inclined his head. "We'll remember that. May the Lord of Light guide you." Then, with surprising courtesy, the outlaws faded back into the trees. A few parted with quick nods at Arya, as though bidding a friend farewell. And so, as dawn crept over the clearing, the Starks sat together around the rekindled fire, tears drying on their cheeks, hearts brimming with disbelief and gratitude. Sansa fussed over Arya's ragged clothes, while Arya did her best to act tough, though she clung to her sister's hand. Robb sat with them, arms around both, gray wind curled protectively. It felt like the old gods themselves had guided them to this moment. No matter what storms the future held, for this dawn at least, they had found their lost sister, and the pack was nearly whole again. In the days that followed, the reunited siblings journeyed north, with Arya riding beside Sansa, telling stories of her adventures and the heartbreak she had witnessed. The Great Jon listened in awe as she described how she'd survived Harrenhal. At night, Robb caught her waking from nightmares, but each time she found solace knowing her family was at hand. The small party retraced their route through the Riverlands, the Neck, and ultimately to Winterfell. Word spread quickly through the north that Arya Stark had been found. When at last they rode through Winterfell's gates, Catelyn, Bran, and Rickon were waiting in the courtyard. The sight of Arya nearly undid Catelyn. She rushed forward, voice breaking as she caught her in a fierce embrace. Bran and Rickon surrounded Arya, each exclaiming in delight. Even the direwolves seemed to sense the significance, all three bounding around the courtyard. Onlooking guards and servants erupted into cheers. The North had regained one of its own. That evening, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the entire Stark family, at least those in Winterfell, shared a meal in the Great Hall. Catelyn, tears glistening, presided over the table, offering thanks to the gods. Sansa and Arya sat side by side, occasional giggles escaping them, as if they couldn't believe they were together again. Bran told Arya of the changes in Winterfell. Rickon boasted of how big Shaggy Dog had grown, and Robb watched them all, a warm glow in his chest. The emptiness left by Ned Stark could never be filled, but this was still a victory he never dared dream of. He caught Arya looking at their father's empty chair, her lips trembling. He squeezed her hand under the table. "We'll never forget him," he whispered, "but we'll keep going together." She nodded, eyes solemn. "That's what wolves do, right?" "Yes," he said, "that's what we do." And so, within the ancient walls of Winterfell, the Starks found a moment of wholeness, against all the odds of war and separation. The storms in the south might rage on. Renly and Stannis might clash, the Lannisters might rise again, the Ironborn might stir. But for now, the North stood strong, guided by the legacy of Ned Stark, secured by an alliance that had broken the Lannisters' hold, and warmed by the quiet miracle of a family reunited. In that fragile peace, they took comfort, prepared to face whatever winter would bring, side by side, hearts as one pack. Arya Stark settled uneasily back into her old bedchamber in Winterfell, though she found the space both familiar and foreign. The worn furs on the bed were the same, the rough-hewn table scuffed in places by her careless childhood knocks, the single window still overlooking the courtyard she had once dashed across with a wooden sword. She had dreamt of returning here for so long that it felt strange to stand upon the polished floorboards and remember how she used to be. She had left as a girl who despised needlework and yearned to be a warrior. She returned with a real blade at her hip and the memory of blood on her hands. In the days following her reunion with her family, she kept a wary distance from some of the daily rhythms of Winterfell. She would wake before dawn, drifting down to the courtyard where the first hints of sunrise lit the walls. Sometimes she practiced swordplay with the Yard's master-at-arms, a tough old Northman who regarded her with mild confusion and then growing respect. Sansa occasionally stood by, wrapped in a heavy cloak, looking on with concern and reluctant admiration. "I'm glad you made it back," Sansa told Arya one frosty morning when Arya finished her drills and lowered her sword, panting. "But I worry. Are you? Are you truly all right?" Arya's face was flushed from exertion. She shrugged, brushing aside sweat-darkened strands of hair. "I'm as all right as I can be," she said curtly. Then she softened, seeing the genuine worry in her sister's eyes. "Sorry. I'm not used to all this calm. Feels like it's going to vanish any moment." Sansa nodded, tugging her cloak tighter. "I know. Sometimes I still see Joffrey in my nightmares screaming at me. Even here, at home." Arya reached out and touched her sister's arm. The resentment she'd once harbored toward Sansa for her ladylike airs had dwindled in the face of everything they had endured. Both had been forced to grow up too fast in ways neither could have imagined. "I won't let anyone hurt you again," Arya said in a low voice, eyes glinting with that fierce protectiveness she had inherited from Ned Stark. Sansa managed a small, grateful smile. "You're not the only one who feels that way." She glanced at the opposite side of the courtyard where Robb stood conversing with Maester Luwin and a few bannermen. He wore a thick cloak trimmed with fur, and his features bore the weight of kingship. "Robb's different now too," Sansa murmured. "We all are." That sentiment clung to Winterfell like the morning frost. Robb had not chosen to be king in the north, yet he had stepped into the role and found a way to preserve his homeland amid the chaos of war. Now, with the main threats shifted far to the south, he worked tirelessly to secure borders, ensure the north had enough supplies for winter, and maintain the new alliance he had forged with King Renly Baratheon. Although that alliance had served them well in defeating the Lannisters and freeing the Stark sisters, the realm remained a patchwork of simmering tensions. Tywin Lannister still held sway in the west, even if diminished, and Stannis Baratheon eyed his younger brother from Dragonstone, refusing to concede the crown. For a time, however, the Starks allowed themselves to bask in their improbable reunion. Long after the midday meal, Catelyn would gather her children, Bran, Rickon, Arya, Sansa, and Robb when his duties permitted, to share quiet conversation in the solar. The flicker of firelight on the walls reminded them of Ned, and occasionally someone would remark on how he might have smiled to see them there. Each time, a hush fell, and Catelyn's eyes shone with unshed tears, but there was solace in being together again. Yet the North could not ignore the rest of the world. One crisp afternoon, a raven from Renly arrived, bringing tidings that Stannis had attempted another maneuver, this time blockading shipping lanes near the Gullet. hoping to starve King's Landing of certain goods. The Tyrells were rallying to open the blockade by force. Renly, for his part, asked if the North might at least send a detachment of ships from White Harbor. Nothing too large, just enough to show that the alliance still held. Robb read the letter by the light of a window, the sky beyond thick with snow clouds. He glanced at Catelyn, who stood near, waiting for his decision. Then he said softly, "We have few warships compared to the Southern Lords, but the Manderleys keep a small fleet. Perhaps it's enough to demonstrate good faith." Roose Bolton, present at the reading, offered a cool caution. "The more the North entangles itself, the more chance we risk in future conflicts. Your Grace, must we truly intervene in a quarrel between two Baratheons?" Robb grimaced. He recalled the clause of their treaty. The North would not be obliged to fight the Baratheons' wars except in the case of a Lannister threat. But it was also true that if they failed to show any support at all, Renly might sour on their alliance, an alliance that still benefited the North in trade and mutual recognition of independence. "A handful of ships might suffice," he said after a moment, setting the letter aside. "We won't commit men on land, but we'll send an envoy. We must keep at least the appearance of cooperation." Catelyn nodded, seeming to approve. "Lord Wyman Manderley will follow your guidance. He has always been eager to see White Harbor recognized as a power at sea." So it was decided. Ravens flew to White Harbor, instructing Lord Manderley to dispatch a small fleet to the Gullet to aid Renly's cause. The gesture would be symbolic more than decisive, but symbols often mattered just as much in politics. Robb tried not to dwell too long on the possibility that any Northerners might die in such an undertaking. This was the delicate dance of being a king, to weigh the cost of every decision against the greater good of the realm. In the following weeks, as the storms settled in and snow fell in earnest, Winterfell's daily life revolved around winter preparations. Dozens of hunts ventured into the Wolfswood, returning with game to salt and store. The larders filled with dried venison and barrels of pickled vegetables. The stables bustled as horses were groomed to endure the cold. Men hammered at new gates, reinforcing them for the potential of an extended winter. Meanwhile, the castle's hot springs kept the interior comfortable, steam curling in hidden tunnels beneath the floors. Arya found ways to help. She insisted on joining the hunts, loosing arrows at a few unlucky pheasants. Sansa joined in more domestic tasks, helping the steward manage inventories. Bran worked closely with Maester Luwin on record-keeping and messenger ravens, while Rickon mostly bounded through the corridors, chasing after Shaggy Dog. Catelyn sat with lords and ladies who arrived seeking Robb's judgment, quietly guiding them toward practical solutions. There was a sense of renewed strength in the castle, as if the Starks' unity had infused Winterfell with life again. One evening, as the snow whirled outside, the family gathered in the Great Hall for a small feast, celebrating the return of a successful hunting party. The kill had been hearty enough to feed many. Harpists played in the background, the strings dancing to a cheerful melody. Wooden tables groaned under spiced venison, fresh bread, honeyed carrots, and well-aged ale. The atmosphere carried a subdued joy, a reminder that after so many tears, the North could still find moments of revelry. At the high table, Robb sat flanked by Sansa and Arya. Across from them were Bran and Rickon, with Catelyn at one end. The Great John occupied a seat nearby, loudly praising the day's hunt. He wore a grin as wide as the winter sky. "We brought back 3 stags," he boomed, "and enough rabbits to feed every hound in the castle. Just be sure to leave some for the wolves," Arya quipped, lifting her goblet in mock salute. The Great John let out a hearty laugh. Sansa, nibbling on bread, glanced at Arya. "I'm glad you can joke," she said quietly. Arya shrugged, mouth quirking. "I'm trying. Feels good to be with all of you." She looked at her brothers, then at her mother. "I never thought I'd see home again." Catelyn heard her, and warmth filled her gaze. "The gods were merciful," she said, though beneath her calm tone lay the awareness of Ned's absence. Even in celebration, that wound still throbbed. At some point, Lord Bolton rose, requesting a private audience with Robb in one of the side chambers. The two withdrew from the hall, the noise of merriment fading behind them. There, by the flickering light of a torch, Bolton revealed tidings from the west. Tywin Lannister had begun courting alliances with smaller houses once loyal to the Tullis in the Riverlands, promising them gold if they'd shift their allegiance. My sources say he's also been in contact with the Freys, Bolton added. Lord Walder might be playing both sides, as he always does. Robb's mouth set in a grim line. Does Tywin not see that the war is finished here? He can't hope to reclaim the Riverlands without facing Renly's new rule in King's Landing. Bolton's voice was steady, almost mild. Lord Tywin might reason that Renly is distracted by Stannis, leaving the Riverlands vulnerable if the king in the north is not watchful. Robb had to concede that possibility. I'll send a raven to Edmure Tully. We'll ensure Riverrun is well supplied and that the lords remain loyal. He paused. And the phrase, they may give us trouble if Lord Walder sees an advantage. I'll keep an eye on them too. Bolton dipped his head in silent agreement. The conversation ended on a note of caution, each man understanding that the realm's peace was tenuous and full of shifting alliances. Robb returned to the feast, forcing a smile as he reclaimed his seat. He did not wish to spoil his family's moment of contentment with grim talk of Lannisters and Freys. But the thoughts clung to him as the night wore on, shaping his awareness that the war might yet rekindle. A week later, Winterfell woke to find the world buried in fresh snow. The ramparts shimmered under sunlight, icicles hanging from stone eaves. The courtyard bustled with men shoveling paths, clearing the castle's main areas. Sansa stood on one of the smaller towers, gazing out over the white horizon. She could see the distant Wolfswood, its dark pines crowned with snow. The sight was so different from King's Landing's mild winters and stifling palace walls. Here, the cold felt clean, purifying. She breathed in, letting it sting her lungs, and felt awake. Below, in the yard, Arya and Rickon were building a snow fort with the help of a few stable boys. Their laughter carried upward, a bright note in the hush. Bran sat on a small platform near the stables, telling Hodder where to place a series of wooden boards for a project, likely some contraption he and Maester Luwin had devised for him to move more easily in the snow. It was a scene so ordinary yet so precious that Sansa's heart ached. They had been so scattered, so lost. Now they were here, forging something like a normal life. She descended the tower steps, carefully holding the railing to keep from slipping. When she reached the courtyard, Rickon called her over, waving both arms. Sansa, come help, we're building the biggest snow wall ever. He had snow caked in his hair, Shaggy Dog bounding around him. She shook her head with a soft smile. I might just watch. I'll leave the masterpiece to you, Rickon. Arya snorted. Too cold for her. But her tone was teasing, not cruel. She scooped a handful of snow and lobbed it, hitting Sansa lightly on the shoulder. Sansa gasped, then laughed. She scooped her own handful, hurling it back. For a moment, they were just sisters caught in a childish snowball fight without any crowns or traumas dividing them. Their laughter echoed across Winterfell's walls, drawing the attention of a few passers-by. Servants paused to smile at the sight of the Stark children frolicking in the snow. It felt like a gift to see them all, battered by war yet capable of joy. Meanwhile, beyond Winterfell, ravens traveled. Edmure Tully sent word that a minor outbreak of banditry in the Riverlands had been stamped out, while Walder Frey assured him of continued loyalty, though, as Edmure wrote to Robb, he did not trust Walder's sincerity. Lord Tywin Lannister had remained oddly quiet for some weeks, possibly waiting for an opening. From the south came a letter from King Renly's court describing a partial success in breaking Stannis' naval blockade. White Harbor's ships had performed well enough to show solidarity, though the Tyrell forces had done most of the heavy lifting. The letter ended with polite thanks and a hope for continued good relations. Robb read it with a sense of relief. Their choice to participate lightly had kept the alliance steady. Still, it was not only war and alliances that shaped the North's concerns. The men of the Night's Watch, far to the north at the Wall, sent a raven requesting additional recruits and supplies. It spoke of strange sightings beyond the Wall, though the tone was measured. Wildlings gather under a new leader, wrote the Lord Commander. We sense unrest in the frost as if an ill wind stirs. Robb had not forgotten his father's caution that the Night's Watch was vital, standing between the realm and the unknown dangers of the far north. War had consumed everyone's attention, but winter's approach meant renewed vigilance was needed. Sitting in the solar with Maester Luwin, Robb composed a response, promising what aid Winterfell could spare. They would send some supplies, food, clothing, and tools, but the realm had been drained by war. As for recruits, many men refused the watch after the war had ended, preferring to return to their families. Robb's letter ended with an expression of concern for the rumored gathering of wildlings. But there was little else he could do unless the situation escalated. The king in the north was not about to dispatch a large force to the wall without clearer evidence of a threat. Time slipped past in a flurry of chores, gatherings, and small joys. One night, as a violent snowstorm battered the walls, the family gathered near the great hearth, sipping mulled wine and swapping stories. Arya recounted an incident from Renly, describing how she tricked a guard with a lie about the wraiths in the tower. Rickon listened wide-eyed, while Bran asked pointed questions about the castle's blackened walls. Sansa, for her part, contributed anecdotes of King's Landing's absurdity, like how courtiers spent hours debating the merits of a new tapestry, leaving Arya rolling her eyes in amusement. Catelyn sewed quietly, glancing up now and then to smile at her children's banter. Robb leaned against the hearth, the warmth on his back, gray wind curled at his feet, listening to the interplay of voices and thinking that in these rare moments, they felt almost complete. If only Ned were there. If only the realm's troubles were truly at an end. Eventually, the conversation lulled and the younger siblings retired for the night. Catelyn lingered, eyeing Robb thoughtfully. "You've done so much for the North already," she said quietly. "But I see how much it weighs on you. Are you coping?" He let out a breath. "I'm managing, Mother. Some days I feel like a pup trying to wear father's boots. But there's no choice. I have to do it." She set aside her sewing. "You're doing well, Robb. We have peace here, and that's more than many in Westeros can say. Just remember to take care of yourself, too." He bowed his head gratefully. "Thank you. I'll try." In truth, he often felt the burdens of war and alliance pressing down. He wanted nothing more than to rule justly and keep his people safe, but the realm was full of intrigues. The more time passed, the more he suspected that the tensions brewing elsewhere would eventually force his hand again. A few days later, a messenger arrived at Winterfell's gates, nearly frozen from traveling through snow-laden roads. When he was led into the Great Hall, he declared himself a courier from the Iron Islands, bearing a letter for Robb Stark. Curiosity rippled through the court. The Iron Islands had stayed quiet during the war, though there had been rumors of restlessness among the Ironborn. The courier bowed stiffly, handed Robb a sealed parchment, then stood aside with chattering teeth as he was offered a cloak and warm drink. Robb examined the seal, an imprint of the Kraken of House Greyjoy. He cut it open and read. The letter was from Balon Greyjoy, Lord of the Iron Islands, father to Theon, who had once been a ward at Winterfell. Balon's words were polite but edged with pride, referencing the new reality in the north and congratulating Robb on winning your battles in the south. Then came the crux. Balon invited Robb to consider a formal treaty of friendship between the Kingdom of the North and the Iron Islands. He hinted that the Ironborn recognized the North's independence, and in return, they wished the North to acknowledge the Iron Islands as an independent kingdom as well. Balon proposed that such an arrangement would benefit both sides, especially in matters of trade and naval defense. Robb read it twice, brow furrowing. He remembered Theon Greyjoy's presence in Winterfell, how they had grown up almost like brothers, though Theon was technically a hostage to ensure Balon's good behavior after the Greyjoy rebellion years ago. Theon had departed with Robb to fight in the south, but the story had grown complicated once Ned Stark was executed. Eventually, Theon had parted ways from Robb, claiming he needed to see his father. Robb had not heard from him since, save rumors that he'd gone to Pike. Balon's letter mentioned Theon not at all. He handed the parchment to Catelyn for her opinion. Her eyes flickered as she read. "The Ironborn are cunning," she said, voice tinged with distrust. "Balon may be plotting to seize more territory or press for concessions. They invaded the north once before. Why should we trust him now?" Robb nodded grimly. "Yet we can't dismiss the possibility that having them as nominal allies keeps them off our shores. The north is large, with a long coastline. If we ignore them, Balon might launch raids, especially if he thinks we're weakened by war." They conferred with Roose Bolton, the Great John, and other bannermen. Most regarded the Ironborn with hostility. Memories of the last Greyjoy rebellion still stung. Ricard Karstark, who had come to Winterfell on another matter, declared that the Ironborn were reavers by nature and that any treaty was a cloak for future attacks. The Great John, ironically, saw a chance to avoid another front, saying that if a piece of parchment might keep the Krakens at bay, they should sign it. Bolton merely observed that the Ironborn might be more valuable as adversaries of the Lannisters if conflict flared again. In the end, Robb decided to reply cautiously. He would express willingness to discuss terms of peace with the Iron Islands, but he would not promise immediate recognition of their independence. He wanted to see if Balan was serious or simply testing the waters. So he composed a brief response, gracious yet noncommittal. He wrote that the North recognized the Ironborn's right to trade freely so long as they respected northern waters and refrained from raiding. He invited Balan to send an emissary to Winterfell for more detailed discussions. Then he stamped it with his seal and handed it to the courier, who left the next morning, face still weary from his journey. Weeks passed, with no word from Balan or Theon. Winter deepened and the days grew shorter. Snowdrifts piled high along the battlements, occasionally requiring teams of men to clear them lest they collapse under the weight. Yet inside the Great Keep, life continued. Arya's cheeks grew rosy from training in the cold, Sansa perfected her stewardship tasks, and Bran advanced in his reading of ancient northern legends. Rickon chased his wolf through the corridors until Catelyn forced him to settle for a midday nap. Robb oversaw it all, traveling occasionally to neighboring holds like Deepwood Motte and the Dreadfort to confirm their readiness for winter. He returned each time more certain that the North was healing from war's wounds. On one such trip, he brought Arya, wanting her to see more of their homeland and gain experience in the broader responsibilities of governance. Riding side by side through snowy groves, they talked about the future. "You should let me handle some of your petty lords," Arya said mischievously. "If they give you trouble, I'll challenge them to a duel." Robb couldn't help but laugh. "That's not how we do things, little sister. You can't solve everything with a sword." Arya pouted in mock annoyance. "Maybe I can't, but I'd like to see them try to push me around." He ruffled her short hair. "And you'll do well, I have no doubt. But these are people we need on our side, not enemies to defeat." Arya conceded with a half-smile. "I'll try to learn. But don't expect me to like fancy words and curtsies." "Never," Robb assured her, amusement lingering in his eyes. He was proud of her resilience, though he sometimes worried about the shadows in her gaze, memories of Harrenhal and the merciless roads she'd traveled. Upon returning to Winterfell, they found fresh rumors from the south. A band of merchants from the Reach had arrived, bringing news of a major battle near Storm's End. Renly's forces, bolstered by Tyrell Knights, had once again clashed with Stannis's men, driving them back with heavy losses. Stannis, so the merchants claimed, relied on foreign sales and fanatical followers of the Red God. Despite a short-lived alliance with some bannermen who doubted Renly's claim, Stannis had been unable to break Storm's End's defenses. Now, the region lay battered, but Renly was said to be celebrating yet another triumph. At dinner that night, the family discussed the ramifications. Sansa asked quietly, "Do you think Stannis will give up now? He's lost so many times." Catelyn shook her head. "Stannis is not a man known to yield. He believes in his right above all else." Robb frowned, swirling wine in his cup. "As long as that conflict remains contained in the Stormlands, it doesn't concern the North directly. But if Stannis looked for a new angle, the realm's divisions could flare again." Arya snorted. "Sounds like Southerners can't stop fighting each other." Bran, perched nearby, nodded thoughtful. "Why, the realm is broken." Rickon glanced between them, uncertain. "But we're safe here, right?" "For now," Robb said, mustering a reassuring tone. "We're safe, and if the gods are kind, we'll remain so." But privately, he reflected on the precariousness of alliances. If Renly prevailed over Stannis completely, the Iron Throne would be secure under Renly's hand, yet Tywin might still pose a threat, or the Ironborn might test the waters. And across the sea, rumors persisted of a surviving Targaryen girl with dragons, though that seemed more like a fireside tale. For the moment, winter was upon them, and the North turned inward, trusting the harsh season to shield them from large-scale invasion. As the solstice approached, Winterfell lit torches along the walls and prepared for the ancient rituals that welcomed the heart of the cold season. The courtyard filled with the aroma of pine boughs and candle wax as servants decorated in the old style. Catelyn presided over a subdued but heartfelt feast, inviting local bannermen and small folk representatives who could make the journey. They sang northern songs around the hearth, voices echoing through the stone halls. Even with the threat of more conflict, they found ways to keep their traditions alive. On the night of the solstice, Bran organized a quiet ceremony in the Godwood. He rode in Hodder's basket saddle, leading Arya, Sansa, Rickon, and a handful of others through the snow toward the Heart Tree. The ancient weirwood loomed white and silent against the darkness, its face carved centuries ago. There, in the hush of swirling flakes, they lit small lanterns and set them at the base of the trunk, each saying a silent prayer for the family's well-being. Sansa prayed for continued peace, Arya for the strength to protect those she loved, Rickon perhaps for more time to play with Shaggy Dog. Bran closed his eyes, sensing the old magic of the land. He could almost feel the tree breathing around them. When they were done, they stood in a circle for a few moments. Arya's breath plumed in the cold air. She reached for Sansa's hand on one side, Rickon's on the other. Hesitantly, they all joined hands. The memory of Ned haunted them still, but in that shared silence, they felt the old gods watching, and they drew comfort from their bond. Whether or not the realm was stable, they had each other. After that, winter progressed in a slow rhythm. Occasionally, small parties of travelers arrived, bringing tidings or seeking shelter. Robb judged a handful of disputes, boundary lines lost under the snow, theft of stored grain. Arya found a role escorting visitors around the castle, at least those who seemed worth the trouble. She enjoyed unnerving them with her quick wit and readiness to grab for her sword. Sansa continued assisting in the library and storerooms, ensuring that everyone had enough to eat when the nights seemed endless. Bran delved deeper into old manuscripts, sometimes discussing them with Maester Luwin late into the night. Rickon, still the youngest, adapted easily to the swirl of older siblings around him, comforted by their presence and that of his direwolf. In early morning hours, Robb would often meet Catelyn for tea in her solar. They would speak quietly of politics, the well-being of their people, the sometimes conflicting opinions of the bannermen. Catelyn guided him with a gentle hand, careful not to overshadow him yet offering the benefit of her experience. Robb came to cherish those talks. They reminded him that the weight of kingship need not be borne alone. Sometimes Sansa or Arya joined as well, listening or contributing their perspectives. It was a new style of ruling, more collaborative, shaped by the trials they had all endured. One day, a raven arrived bearing the seal of House Manderly. Lord Wyman's letter informed Robb that the small northern fleet had returned from the Gullet. They had lost one ship to storms, but the others had proven themselves, cooperating alongside Tyrell galleys. Renly's admirals had welcomed the aid. Stannis's blockade had fractured, with many of his hired sails deserting after a lack of payment. Manderly's letter praised the alliance for strengthening the North's ties to the southern shipping lanes, suggesting that when the seas thawed further, White Harbor might see more trade ships from the Reach and beyond. Robb wrote back commending their efforts. He hoped the North could benefit from stable commerce without being dragged into further war. Around that time, talk emerged from the servants' quarters. Was the king in the North to marry soon? Some whispered that a union with a southern house, perhaps the Tyrells, could solidify the alliance. Others, more pragmatic, believed Robb should wed a northern lady to reaffirm the old ways. When the rumors reached Robb, he dismissed them outwardly, but it stirred a sense of inevitability. Kings married, secured heirs, formed bonds that shaped the realm's future. He realized with a pang that Ned would have guided him through such decisions. Now he had only his mother's counsel, though her own experiences were shaped by a Tully Stark union. He wondered if it was wise to tie himself to the south again, or if it might be better to remain purely northern. For the moment, he shelved the question, not feeling ready for it. In the heart of winter, the day after a fierce blizzard, a raven arrived from the west with disturbing news. Small warships bearing the Kraken sigil had been sighted off the coast near the Rills. They had not attacked, merely sailed close to shore as if scouting. The letter came from Lord Ryswell, who expressed alarm that the Ironborn might be testing the North's defenses. Robb recalled Balon Greyjoy's letter, which had yet to yield any further response. It seemed the Ironborn might be playing a double game, feigning diplomacy while also scoping vulnerabilities. The courtyard was alive with commotion as Robb shared this news with his assembled lords. The Greyjoy grumbled that they should strike first, sending outriders to the coasts. Roose Bolton advised caution, saying that a small presence might deter the Ironborn from raiding, but that it would be foolish to commit large numbers to the frigid coasts in midwinter. Catelyn stood near, arms folded, watching her son navigate the discussion. "I'll send a contingent from the Rills to watch the shoreline," Robb decided at last. "They'll raise alarms if the Ironborn attempt a landing. We'll also dispatch a raven to Pike, demanding an explanation." He exhaled, scanning the ring of faces. "We're not at war with the Iron Islands, not officially, but we won't allow them to harry our coasts." Letters were soon flying across the north, alerting coastal lords to the possibility of raids. Despite the deep snow, men readied themselves, stockpiling arrows and reinforcing towers along the shore. Robb regretted the new tension, but better to be prepared than complacent. He also wrote to Balon Greyjoy reminding him that they awaited an emissary if he wished to discuss a treaty, adding that any hostile action against northern shores would be taken as an act of war. The letter's tone was firm, for no matter how burdensome another conflict might be, the North would not be cowed. In these days, Theon Greyjoy remained a mystery. None in Winterfell knew if he sided with his father's ambitions or if he might remember the bonds he once forged with the Starks. Arya asked about him now and then, scowling. "He was your friend, wasn't he, Robb?" she said. "Why hasn't he shown his face?" Robb found he had no answer. He remembered Theon's laughter, his swagger and confidence, the times they'd hunted together. But that seemed another life. "I don't know," Robb replied quietly. He went back to Pike months ago. Perhaps Balon has turned him fully to the Ironborn cause. Arya's lips thinned. "If we see him on the battlefield, I won't hesitate." Robb didn't scold her. Part of him felt the same. War changed loyalties, reshaped friendships into resentments. He only hoped it wouldn't come to that. Winter deepened, yet messages continued to arrive with rumors of the Ironborn prowling the western coasts. A few fishing villages reported glimpses of longships in the distance. The Watchers said they saw torches at night or silhouettes of sails vanishing at dawn. Some suspected the Ironborn might be testing each settlement's defenses, looking for easy prey. This pattern repeated until one bitter morning, a frantic raven from Deepwood Motte declared that a small force of Ironborn had landed near a remote stretch of beach and burned a handful of farmsteads. Houses were left smoldering, livestock stolen, a few villagers slain. Fury gripped Winterfell's Great Hall when the news was announced. Men muttered oaths, demanding retribution. Arya clenched her fists, recalling the plunder she had witnessed in the Riverlands. Catelyn's face grew pale, though her voice was steady when she spoke. "We can't allow them to strike at will." Robb consulted his closest advisors. "We must respond, but winter roads are treacherous. Sending a large army over land could be slow, and the Ironborn might slip away by sea." Roose Bolton's eyes glimmered in the torchlight. A small force of skilled fighters could depart from White Harbor by ship, then move north along the coast to cut them off. The Great John pounded the table. "Aye, we can chase them at sea. Show them the North has teeth on water too." Sansa, present at the discussion, looked anxious. "But we have so few ships. If the Ironborn have a larger fleet, might we be walking into a trap?" "Possibly," Robb admitted. "But if we do nothing, they'll see we lack resolve. Then more raids will come." He exhaled. "All right. I'll send word to Lord Manderly. He'll dispatch part of his fleet to the western coasts. And we'll gather a small band of Northmen, archers, perhaps a few cavalry that can be transported by ship to land behind the Ironborn if they strike again. They won't be expecting a counter by sea." Despite the winter, they moved swiftly. Over the next fortnight, men mustered at White Harbor, and Lord Manderly prepared several warships and transports. Bolton contributed men from the Dreadfort, the Great John from Last Hearth. Robb considered leading the mission himself, part of him burned to confront the Ironborn. But he recognized the risk to Winterfell if he left. After discussion with Catelyn and his advisors, he agreed to remain at Winterfell to coordinate and ensure they were not leaving themselves vulnerable. Instead, he appointed Helman Tallheart, a capable northern knight with experience in coastal skirmishes, to command the expedition. "Strike fast," Robb told Tallheart. "If you catch them on land, show no mercy to raiders. But if they're at sea, out of reach, don't chase them beyond reason." Tallheart bowed, promising to do the North proud. Raventree Hall, in the Riverlands, offered a few volunteer archers who had repaid their loyalty to House Stark since the war with the Lannisters. Armed with those recruits and the men from the north, Tallheart set sail from White Harbor in the bitter cold. The Watchers at Winterfell felt a keen anxiety. Some recalled old battles with the Ironborn, how they attacked swift as lightning, then vanished. Now the North had to act with equal cunning. In the meantime, Arya pressed Robb to let her join the operation, insisting she could fight. Robb refused. He saw the spark in her eyes, the same fire that had led her through countless dangers, but he couldn't risk her. She had only just returned home. Arya fumed, yet part of her also seemed relieved not to face more killing. Instead, she threw herself into training with the Guard, determined to be ready should more trouble come. A month passed. The solstice season gave way to deeper winter, the days short as candlewicks. Winterfell endured storms that howled across the battlements, forcing everyone to huddle inside the main keep. During one blizzard, a battered raven arrived with a coded message from Helman Tallheart. The code, arranged by Maester Luwin, was quickly deciphered. It revealed that Tallheart's force had intercepted Ironborn raiders near a cluster of small islets off the western coast, capturing or killing many. A handful of local fisherfolk had guided them to hidden coves where the Ironborn anchored. The skirmish was bloody but successful. Northern forces destroyed several longships in harbor, cutting off the Reavers' retreat. Tallheart's letter spoke of Ironborn survivors who had tried to flee but were run down on the beaches. Some prisoners had been taken. However, the letter also warned that more Ironborn might be at large. They'd found signs of a larger fleet that had slipped away northward. Robb read this news aloud to Catelyn, Arya, Sansa, and a few lords in the Solar. A sense of grim satisfaction spread. They had shown the Ironborn they were not helpless. Still, there was worry over the mention of a larger fleet. Where was it headed? Might it appear elsewhere along the coast? Catelyn placed a hand on Robb's shoulder. You did well. If they persist, they'll face more resistance. That might make Balon Greyjoy reconsider any grand invasion. Arya scowled at the map pinned on the table. We should keep pressing, chase them down, show them we're not afraid. Tallheart will continue scouting, Robb said. But winter seas are treacherous. Let's not lose good men to the waves. He tapped a finger on the positions marked by Tallheart. We'll keep reinforcements ready in case they appear near Deepwood Motte or Bear Island. Over the next days, the snow eased a bit, granting respite. Armed with Tallheart's success, Robb circulated letters to the northern lords urging vigilance on all coasts. Sansa helped draft the letters, her handwriting careful and elegant. Arya, restless, volunteered to ride to some smaller inland villages to keep morale up, but Robb reminded her that traveling was hazardous. She grudgingly acquiesced, remaining at Winterfell to practice her sword skills against a rotating group of guards. She beat some of them handily, leaving them sheepish in defeat. One bright morning, a visitor arrived, an Ironborn emissary accompanied by 4 guards. The gatehouse watchers nearly refused them entry, but the envoy bore a letter from Balon Greyjoy, apparently in response to Robb's missives. The delegation was brought to the Great Hall, where Robb sat upon a simple wooden seat. He disdained using the dais Ned once sat upon for daily business, preferring a less elevated stance. The hall was lined with northern soldiers, each armed and ready in case this was a trick. The emissary introduced himself as Dagmar, an older man with a pock-scarred face, wearing mail under a salt-stained cloak. He bowed stiffly. King Robb, I come on behalf of Lord Balon Greyjoy. Robb studied him. You took your time, Dagmar. Meanwhile, your people have raided our shores. Dagmar's face remained impassive. Some among us are eager for the old ways of reaving. Lord Balon regrets these incidents. He wishes to assure you that if a proper treaty is reached, he will rein in those who violate it. The Iron Islands desire independence, as do you. Perhaps we can stand as equals. A rumble of discontent moved through the Northmen. From the side, Arya glowered. She wanted to confront this man about the murdered farmers. But she held her tongue, trusting Robb's leadership for now. Robb leaned forward. Talk of independence means nothing while your men burn farms and kill our people. We captured some of these raiders. They claimed they acted under orders from Pike. Dagmar inclined his head. They might have been misguided or led by hot-blooded captains. Lord Balon denies sanctioning any official raids. Robb's eyes narrowed. Fine. Then if Balon truly wants peace, he'll pay reparations for the harm done. Gold, livestock, something to compensate those families that lost everything. And he must recall any Ironborn currently lurking in our seas. Only then will I even consider a treaty acknowledging his rule over the Iron Islands. Murmurs of approval rippled among the northern onlookers. Dagmar's jaw tightened. That is a high demand. Lord Balon believes the North might prefer an alliance that includes mutual defense. The seas are dangerous, and our ships are the same ones harassing our coasts, Robb snapped. He paused, regaining composure. Go back to Balon. Tell him that if he truly wants to stand as an equal ally to the North, he must demonstrate good faith. No more raids. Restitution for those attacked. And a formal condemnation of any captains who violate the peace. Then we can talk. Otherwise, we'll assume he's at war with us. Dagmar's mouth pressed into a thin line. I will deliver your words. May I remain here for a few days to rest before returning? Robb considered. Allowing an Ironborn envoy to roam Winterfell was risky, but turning him out immediately might be seen as an insult. You can remain under guard, Robb said at last. No roaming the castle unescorted. Dagmar bowed. Thank you, King Robb. After they led Dagmar away, the hall broke into heated discussion. The Greyjoy roared that Balon's claims were worthless, urging swift retribution. Roose Bolton warned that if they refused diplomacy, the Ironborn might escalate. Catelyn remained calm, suggesting that at least they had a line of communication now, however tenuous. Arya stalked off in frustration, wanting more direct action. Robb stood by his decision, though inwardly he wondered if the Ironborn merely toyed with them. That night, Dagmar remained under close watch in a small tower room. Maester Luwin checked on him briefly, ensuring he had no hidden weapons. He found the older man quietly contemplative, as if carefully weighing next steps. Whatever the outcome, it seemed the Iron Islands would not fade quietly into the background. Days later, Dagmar departed, accompanied by an armed escort to the edges of Stark territory. Letters pinned to his belt spelled out Robb's terms. Arya asked whether the Ironborn would actually comply. Robb sighed. "We'll see soon enough." As winter's heart continued, the north endured further storms, each fierce gale reminding them that no southern host could easily march through these drifts. It was a fortress of ice and snow. Word eventually arrived that Helmund Tallheart had returned to White Harbor, having kept the coasts relatively secure for the moment. At Robb's direction, Tallheart remained on alert, prepared to sail again if needed. So far, no sign of the rumored larger Ironborn fleet had emerged. Some speculated it had been a ruse or had turned back after the North's robust response. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister's name reappeared in a trickle of reports from the Riverlands. Edmure Tully wrote that the Lannisters were offering gold to impoverished smaller houses, hoping to foment rebellion. Yet Edmure claimed the measures were unsuccessful. Too many in the Riverlands remembered the devastation Tywin's army had wrought. The Riverlords recognized that their best hope lay with Robb Stark, who had freed them from Lannister oppression. As a result, most had chosen unwavering loyalty. Walder Frey remained an enigma, sending polite but vague messages to Edmure. The sense was that Tywin's influence in the region had shriveled. Robb allowed himself some satisfaction at that, remembering the pain the Lannisters had inflicted. Reports from King's Landing indicated that Renly had consolidated power further, ensuring that the royal court recognized him as the rightful Baratheon king. The small council now featured several Tyrell members, and the city had stabilized under Marjorie's charitable efforts to feed the poor. The faith of the Say then had, for the most part, acknowledged Renly's claim, though a few devout septons whispered that Stannis was older and thus the rightful king. Regardless, the city had not starved, and Renly's hold looked stronger than ever. He did not request new assistance from the north, which Robb took as a blessing. No further calls to arms meant the alliance stood without demanding more bloodshed. Perhaps the realm could finally heal. Yet ominous tidings from the Wall kept a thread of worry alive. Maester Luwin shared a new letter from the Night's Watch. Wildlings were gathering in unprecedented numbers beyond the Wall, rumored to follow a man calling himself King Beyond the Wall. While the Watch had survived such threats before, the letter hinted at something more sinister in the far north: pale shadows and disappearances. The words were guarded, but the subtext was uneasy. Robb read it in silence, recalling old stories about the Long Night and the others. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature crawled down his spine. He asked for opinions from his lords, but most dismissed the tales as wildling exaggeration. The Great John joked that a few hundred watchers could handle ragged wildlings. Roose Bolton remained neutral, though he noted that if large numbers of wildlings crossed into the north, it could be a problem. At length, Robb decided to send additional supplies to Castle Black, furs, some food. He also urged the Night's Watch to keep him informed. The North might be in no position to dispatch a grand army, but they wouldn't abandon the Watch. If the rumors turned into a real threat, that would overshadow petty wars in the south or west. However, for now, there was no direct evidence of the others, just talk of ghostly shapes in the woods. People had always whispered such legends. Winterfell trudged on through the season, the family forging new routines each week. One crisp morning, Sansa was supervising the distribution of bread in the Great Hall, ensuring the castle staff had enough supplies, when Arya burst in, face alight. "Sansa, you have to come outside." Sansa blinked. "What is it? Is something wrong?" Arya only grinned. "No, but you'll want to see." She grabbed Sansa's hand, practically dragging her out of the hall. Sansa, startled, followed until they reached the courtyard. There, near the stables, Rickon stood on a box, brandishing a small wooden sword. Across from him was none other than Hodder, a gentle smile on his face, also wielding a wooden sword sized for a man of his stature. Bran watched from his nearby seat. Rickon was teaching Hodder some kind of playful routine, each strike comically telegraphed, with Hodder responding, "Hodder," and stepping aside. The stable boys clapped and cheered, laughing at each blunder. Even the guards paused to watch. Sansa found herself laughing in delight. "What are they doing?" Arya shrugged, eyes glinting with mirth. Rickon insisted on showing Hodder some battle moves. "Bran's just letting it happen." She paused, a note of tenderness creeping into her voice. "We don't get many moments like this." Sansa took in the sight of Rickon's exuberance, Hodder's simple contentment, the warmth it brought to the watchers. "We really don't," she said. "But maybe we'll have more." They remained there, smiling at the spectacle, feeling for once as though the world's troubles were distant. The clacking of wooden swords against each other was a bright note in the hush of the winter air, an echo of what childhood should be. Later, the family gathered again, teasing Rickon about his fine swordsmanship. He just grinned, glowing from the attention. And so life continued. The nights remained long, the storms frequent, but Winterfell endured. No word came from Balon Greyjoy, though an occasional rumor suggested the Ironborn might be biding their time until the weather eased. Robb refused to let his guard down, maintaining the watch on the coasts. The Night's Watch letters implied tension beyond the wall grew, but no new crisis had erupted. The Riverlands stayed loyal, King's Landing stable for now. Tywin Lannister lingered in the west, subdued but unbroken. Stannis lurked on Dragonstone, swearing one day he would unseat Renly. Yet no fresh summons to war disrupted the peace of the north, fragile though that peace might be. Gradually, the worst of the winter receded, giving way to an early thaw. Drifts melted around Winterfell's walls, turning the courtyard into a sloppy mess of slush. Icicles dripped from the eaves with soft, rhythmic plinks. By day, watery sunshine broke through gray skies. By night, freezing temperatures still hardened the ground. But everyone felt a subtle shift, as if the land were stirring from a deep sleep. On a mild afternoon, Robb led his siblings outside the walls to ride through the nearby fields, wanting to see how the farmland had fared. They found patches of brown earth emerging from the snow, the streams loosening of ice. Farmers, wearing heavy boots, poked at the soil, assessing readiness for spring planting. Though it was far from a full spring, hope welled in them. The war had claimed many hands, but those who remained were determined to rebuild. Arya guided her horse through muddy ruts with a practiced hand, scanning the horizon as if expecting to see an invader. Sansa rode more cautiously, robes bundled against the chill, but her face was bright with the promise of warmer days. Bran trailed behind on a sturdy Garen, Hodder leading them. Rickon rode with a guard, wide-eyed at the changing landscape. Robb watched them all, aware that each sibling had stepped far beyond the innocence of childhood, but grateful they still had each other. That evening, as they returned to Winterfell, Catelyn greeted them at the gate with news. A raven from Storm's End had arrived, bearing official messages from Renly's court. Robb dismounted, handing his reins to a stable boy, and read the letter under a torch. It stated that Stannis had retreated again, his forces in disarray. Renly felt the time was ripe to proclaim a grand unification of the realm, an event in King's Landing to which all lords would be invited, including the king in the north, so that they might celebrate the end of major hostilities and reaffirm alliances for a new era of peace. The letter diplomatically noted that it recognized the North's independence, but King Renly wished to open the possibility of a lasting arrangement that might see the Seven Kingdoms stronger than ever. Robb snorted softly as he read that phrase. He knew it was code for Renly's desire to bring all Westeros under his direct rule if possible. At the same time, the letter invited him as an honored guest, promising safe conduct and the potential for beneficial trade expansions. Robb handed it to Catelyn, who scanned it with a pensive expression. Arya, standing nearby, scowled. "He wants you to bend the knee, doesn't he?" Robb shook his head. "He knows better than to phrase it that way, but I suspect he hopes I'll join his so-called United Kingdom eventually. Our pact was for an alliance that left us independent. I have no intention of rescinding that." Sansa approached, curiosity in her eyes. "But if the war is truly ending, maybe we should at least show we're willing to speak. We fought beside Renly once." Catelyn nodded slowly. "A refusal might suggest hostility, which we don't need. A presence at this gathering could strengthen our trade ties and secure the realm's acceptance of the North's independence. Sometimes you must attend these events not to yield, but to ensure your voice is heard." Arya huffed. "Another fancy feast." Robb looked at the letter again, mulling the risk. King's Landing remained filled with memories of Ned Stark's death and Sansa's captivity, though now Joffrey was dethroned and prisoner. If Robb went, he would bring only a modest retinue, and the city might not be as hostile as under Lannister rule. Renly had proven more gracious. Still, the idea of returning to that city churned his stomach. He had no illusions that politics in King's Landing could be manipulative. On the other hand, forging a stable peace might spare countless lives. "I'll think on it," he told them. "No decisions yet. We must also consider the North's security. If I leave, we need to ensure the Ironborn can't take advantage." That night, he convened a council of banner men, Bolton, the Great John, Lady Mormont, and others. They debated the merits of answering Renly's invitation. Most recognized that showing up with a proud but not aggressive stance could help. Yet they worried about the distance, the possibility of betrayal, the memory of Ned's fate. Ultimately, Robb decided he would go, but with a carefully chosen group, perhaps 100 men, along with close advisors who understood southern courts. Arya and Sansa each volunteered to accompany him for their own reasons. Sansa had become adept at reading courtly intrigues, while Arya refused to let her brother walk into a potential trap alone. Catelyn insisted that the younger children remain. Bran and Rickon would stay at Winterfell, continuing to learn governance. The castle cannot be left without a Stark, Catelyn said. Already you, Arya, and Sansa gone means few Starks remain. We must keep at least 2 here. Bran accepted the logic with calm maturity, though Rickon pouted about being left behind. Eventually, the family reached consensus. Robb, Arya, and Sansa would travel south with a retinue including Roose Bolton, who had a talent for reading men, and possibly the Great Jon, though he was not the most diplomatic. Catelyn would remain in Winterfell to guide Bran and Rickon, aided by Maester Luwin. Lady Mormont would bolster the defenses in their absence, ensuring the Ironborn could not slip in. Preparations began at once, complicated by the fact that winter had not fully ended. The roads between the north and the southern lands might still be choked with ice. But they had marched that route before, during the war, so it was possible. Robb arranged for a chain of supply wagons, extra rations, and a line of messenger ravens to keep in touch with Winterfell. He decided to follow the main King's Road, crossing the neck at Moat Cailin, passing the Twins, then traveling through the Riverlands to the capital. He wrote to Edmure Tully, informing him of their route and requesting safe lodging at Riverrun along the way. The night before they were to depart, the Starks gathered one last time in the Great Hall, sharing a warm meal. Catelyn's expression was subdued as she served bread and salt fish. "I wish we could remain together," she said. "But I know you must do what's right for the North." Robb gripped her hand. "We'll be careful. I promise." Sansa tried to appear composed, though her eyes flickered with anxiety at the thought of returning to King's Landing. Arya was restless, torn between excitement for a new adventure and dread at stepping into the city where Ned died. Bran and Rickon exchanged glances, worried about their siblings traveling so far. When the meal ended, they lingered in the hall, saying goodbyes. Hugs were exchanged. Rickon clung to Robb as if afraid he might never return. Arya gave Bran a bracing pat on the arm, telling him to keep reading those old books so that he'd be a wise lord someday. Sansa embraced her mother, promising to watch over Arya. Catelyn's tears glistened, but she held them in check, exuding calm for her children's sake. A hush fell as they parted for the night, each heading to their chambers with a swirl of memories and worries. Dawn arrived pale and cold. Trumpets sounded in the courtyard, where the assembled retinue prepared to ride. Horses snorted, breath fogging the air. Wagons stood laden with supplies. Men in Stark livery checked their gear. Roose Bolton arrived wearing heavier armor than usual, his face typically impassive. The Great Jon roared instructions at a cluster of younger knights, ensuring they packed enough ale for the journey. Sansa wore a cloak lined with fox fur, her posture stiff with nerves. Arya lightly patted the hilt of her sword, scanning the courtyard. Robb was the last to appear, gray wind pacing at his side, his kingly cloak draped over strong shoulders. They formed up at the gates, turning to face Catelyn, Bran, and Rickon, who stood on the battlements watching. Robb raised an arm in farewell, heart heavy. Behind them, the gates opened, revealing the snow-dusted road leading south. A hush fell as the party began to move, horses' hooves crunching on the frosty ground. Catelyn pressed a fist to her mouth, swallowing emotion as she watched her children depart. Bran sat quietly astride his horse, flanked by Hodder, Rickon clinging to his side. For the Starks, yet another separation was underway, another leap into the unknown. At first, the journey was grueling, winds cut across the open plains, stinging cheeks and making conversation scarce. But the travelers pressed on, halting each evening to set camp or claim shelter in a holdfast if one was near. Sansa seldom spoke, lost in her thoughts of King's Landing and what awaited her there. Arya occasionally scouted ahead with a handful of guards, relishing the chance to ride free rather than remain in a formal column. Robb alternated between studying maps with Bolton and the Great Jon, ensuring they stayed on the best routes. They still worried about potential Ironborn infiltration, but nothing disturbed their progress through the neck aside from patches of melting snow and muddy terrain. They passed Moat Cailin's ancient towers without incident, the crumbling stones silent under a thin coat of ice. Then came the crossing into the Riverlands, where the thaw had advanced further, turning roads into muck. Villages they encountered recognized Stark banners, hailing Robb as the hero who liberated them from Lannister oppression. Women brought out bowls of stew, men offered worn cloaks in homage. Some told harrowing tales of the old war's scars but expressed gratitude that they at least had peace now. Robb accepted their thanks quietly, mindful that lingering pockets of bandits still roamed. They traveled with caution, though no major threat emerged. When they reached the twins, they found Walder Frey's brood manning the gates. A lesser fry greeted them with studied politeness, referencing the alliance that once let Robb cross. Robb recalled with some unease how the Freys demanded concessions in that deal, granting them privileges in the Riverlands. But now with the war over, the terms were mostly moot. Walder Frey himself did not appear, citing advanced age and the cold. The crossing was granted with minimal fuss, though Arya eyed the twin castles warily, remembering how the Freys seemed untrustworthy. Robb handled the negotiations swiftly, exchanging pleasantries and paying a modest toll. Soon they were on the other side, heading deeper into Tully territory. The day they rode up to Riverrun's gates, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the castle in unexpected warmth. Edmure Tully came forth to welcome them, arms open in genuine cheer. "My dear nephew," he said, embracing Robb. "It's been too long. And my young nieces." He smiled at Sansa and Arya, though the memory of Ned's death and the war that followed still glimmered behind his eyes. Riverrun offered a brief respite. The party rested for 2 days, feasting in Edmure's hall. Edmure was eager for news of Winterfell, for he had not visited since the war ended. He updated them on the Riverlands' rebuilding efforts. Fields were being replanted, burned villages slowly restored. The mood was hopeful, though rumors persisted that Tywin Lannister might stir again. Edmure told them he was preparing to reaffirm fealty to House Tully as the ruling lords of the Trident, with no illusions of bending the knee to King's Landing as long as the North remained separate. They were allied with the Starks, who had proven their loyalty in blood. Robb appreciated Edmure's resolve, though he advised caution regarding Walder Frey. Over cups of mulled wine, Edmure inquired about the upcoming gathering in King's Landing. "You trust Renly?" he asked. "He's grown quite strong in the south, or so I hear." Robb shrugged. "I trust him more than I ever trusted Joffrey. But I remain wary. He would love to see the North reintegrated if he could manage it." Edmure sighed. "Well, better Renly than that creature Joffrey. At least your sisters are safe." They parted on good terms. Edmure offered a small escort of Riverland knights, just in case the roads south were dangerous. Robb accepted, welcoming the extra swords. With that, they continued their journey, crossing the Red Fork, then heading east along the old highways that led eventually to the King's Road. The land here showed fewer signs of the war's scars. Fields were once more green in spots, villages busily preparing for the planting season. Farmers paused to watch the procession pass, some pointing at the dire wolf banners. As they neared the boundary of the Crownlands, the presence of royal guards grew more noticeable. Occasional patrols in Renly's Stag-Ann Crown sigil passed by, exchanging polite greetings. They recognized Stark colors and offered assurances that the roads were safe. Arya frowned at such patrols, remembering the Lannister men who once terrorized these parts, but these knights seemed less hostile. Finally, one afternoon, the high walls and 7 gates of King's Landing came into view. The city sprawled on the horizon, banners flapping from ramparts, columns of smoke rising from chimneys and blacksmith forges. The Red Keep, perched on Aegon's high hill, cast a familiar silhouette. Sansa felt her stomach tighten now. She had never imagined returning here. The memories of her captivity under Joffrey pressed on her, and she shivered even though the day was relatively mild. Arya rode closer, sensing her sister's apprehension, and laid a hand on her arm in silent solidarity. Robb gazed at the city, recalling the last time he was here, storming the gates with Renly's help to topple Joffrey. It felt like another lifetime. A party of Renly's heralds approached, trumpets sounding a fanfare. They welcomed the king in the north and his retinue, inviting them to enter the city as honored guests. Despite the politeness, Robb's men stayed on guard, scanning the walls for any sign of trickery. But the gates swung open, revealing crowds lining the streets. Word had spread that Robb Stark was arriving. Onlookers craned their necks, some cheering, others eyeing them with curiosity or suspicion. Many recalled the battle that unseated Joffrey not so long ago. Progress through the city was slow, the streets clogged with people. The stench of King's Landing returned, sweat, refuse, tanneries overwhelming to those used to the crisp air of the north. Sansa wrinkled her nose, though she tried not to show her distaste openly. Arya scowled at the crush of bodies. Robb kept his composure, nodding at the small folk who called out blessings or thanks. Near the Red Keep, the roads were cleaner, the crowds more refined. Goldcloaks stood watch. The castle gates swung wide, revealing a courtyard with fresh banners, the crown stag of House Baratheon, the golden rose of House Tyrell, and still a few dire wolf standards from when the alliance was first declared. Renly himself emerged to greet them, dressed in a splendid doublet of green velvet embroidered with golden stags. His crown rested easily on his head and he sported a confident grin. Marjorie Tyrell stood beside him, regal in a gown of pale green, her eyes bright. Ser Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers, wore polished armor and stood with a group of knights. The courtyard bristled with southern lords, each curious to see how this moment might UNF. When Robb dismounted, Grey Wind loped at his side, drawing gasps from the courtiers who remembered the stories of the direwolf. Renly stepped forward with arms extended. "King Robb, welcome back to King's Landing. I trust the journey was not too harsh." Robb inclined his head, not kneeling. "It was long, but we managed." He glanced at Marjorie. "My lady." Marjorie curtsied with practiced elegance. "We are delighted you have come. It is our hope that we can strengthen the peace between our realms." Before Robb could respond, Arya hopped off her horse, scanning the courtyard as if searching for threats. Sansa followed more demurely, face composed despite her nerves. Renly's gaze flicked to them and he offered a pleasant smile. "Lady Arya, Lady Sansa, I'm glad to see you well. Your last visit to the capital was overshadowed by turmoil." Arya said nothing, though her stare was intense. Sansa managed a faint polite smile, remembering how she had been forced to kneel before Joffrey in this very keep. Renly sensed the tension but kept his tone light. "You must be weary. We have prepared chambers in the Tower of the Hand for you and your retinue. Please come inside. We have much to discuss in the days ahead: celebrations, feasts, and hopefully fruitful negotiations." Robb exchanged a swift glance with Bolton and the great Jon, who flanked him. Then he nodded. "Very well." Thus they entered the Red Keep once more, the corridors now decorated with fresh tapestries that displayed the stag of Baratheon and the rose of Tyrell entwined. Gone were the lion banners that once signified Lannister influence. Servants bustled, offering refreshment, guiding them to quarters. A hush followed them wherever they went, many recalling how Robb's army had stood with Renly's to unseat the Lannisters. Now they returned not as conquerors but as distant allies with uncertain prospects. In their assigned chambers, Robb convened a brief meeting. The great Jon paced, unimpressed by the finery. Bolton examined the tapestries with detached interest. Arya and Sansa stood near the window, eyeing the city from above. "Tomorrow," Robb said, "we'll attend Renly's reception in the throne room. That's presumably where he'll outline his vision for the realm. We must remain vigilant. No matter how friendly he appears, he wants something from us." Sansa turned, cheeks pale. "He wants us back in the fold, under the Iron Throne." Arya folded her arms. "He can't have that." Robb exhaled. "No, he can't. But let's see what he proposes. We'll hold our ground politely. Show them we aren't to be trifled with." They agreed. The sun set behind the city, painting the sky in orange and pink. The horns outside the keep announced the arrival of more lords from across Westeros, come to witness Renly's grand event. Soon, the halls would fill with pomp, feasting, and subtle power games. The king in the north had stepped back into the Dragon's Maw, albeit under better circumstances than last time. Yet danger lingered, for King's Landing had always been a place where men and women played the deadliest games for power. And so the Starks braced themselves, resolved to protect their independence, prepared to outlast the southern intrigues again, even as winter's memory clung to them like a cold wind from the north.